those categories.
That clock is fast.
Each three and one.
Okay, oh my gosh, so much stuff.
The agenda,
So I'm just gonna take it off right there. Leave it in discussion.
under discussion, okay, good. Good evening. I call this Iowa City Community School Board meeting on Tuesday, December 11th, 2018 to order. My name is Janet Godwin, and I want to thank those in the audience, those watching on YouTube, and those following on Twitter for joining us tonight. I'll start by introducing those at the table with me. To the right, Superintendent Steve Murley, Directors Ruthina Malone, Phil Hemingway, Lori Rotlin, Paul Ressler, Sean Icestone, J.P. Clausen, and Kim Colvin, Recording Secretary. The public is reminded that if they wish to speak, they need to complete a speaker form found at the table in the lobby and turn it in. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting during the community comment section of the agenda. With that, we'll go over to our student representative updates. Up first, let's see, we've got from City High, Lottie Goodall and Naomi Maurice. Good evening.
Good evening.
Musically, City High's music departments are starting to perform for the community, and they've been working on these pieces for a few months now. Recently, the choir, band, and orchestra programs came together to perform Mozart's Requiem with great success, and we're looking forward to a 4th Avenue Show Choir Winter Showcase that's this weekend at, I believe, 3 and 7 on Saturday.
The Student Senate just finished an incredibly successful can drive for the Crisis Center. We raised 2,337 pounds of food and over $2,000 in cash, which makes a total of over 11,000 pounds of food. It was truly wonderful to see our classmates come together to make this happen.
And then City High is very proud of our junior Forrest Frazier, who just won the 100 breaststroke at the Junior Nationals in Texas. And he has already verbally committed to UC Berkeley to swim. So
Wow.
we're very proud of him.
City West basketball on Friday was such a fun night. Both schools got a win. The crowd and student sections just really came out in force to support their teams. These athletic opportunities also present other opportunities as well. For example, Dance Marathon raised over $400 through a silent auction. Sparkles, which is a cheerleading squad similar to Best Buddies in that it allows students with and without disabilities to come together and cheer. They had a great halftime performance.
And then our pep band was super energetic. Our girls cross country team was able to present the money they raised through the Run for Relief for IC Compassion, and that was over $6,000. Our Little Hawk newspaper put on a very successful pregame ESPN type commentary. That was really cool, and it was just a really great atmosphere on Friday.
Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the update. Next up from West High, Paras Basuk. Good evening.
Good evening. These past few weeks have marked the end of the first trimester and the beginning of the cold winter months for West High. This time of year is truly packed full of events and activities for the students. To start, Psyched held its annual diversity dinner in the West High cafeteria, and it was a fantastic success. With a variety of foods, music, art, and a great turnout, the event succeeded in representing the diversity of cultures at West. Theater West put on its fall play, Miracle on 34th Street, on the weekend of December 1st. This celebration of talent displayed a beautiful set and many musicians in addition to the actors on stage. The music playathon took place on November 15th with more than 20 acts and a turnout of 250 people. Winter sports have begun, and West wrestling team has already had a fantastic start in their success at Jefferson High School. West High's varsity dance team also succeeded in becoming state champions in Des Moines last week. A number of West High students have received acknowledgement and were commended for their hard work in and outside of school in the past month. Ala Ali was awarded the Questbridge Match full scholarship to Columbia University, and Jessica Munjali has been selected as a representative on the State of Iowa Youth Advisory Council. Student Senate has begun its annual food drive for donations to the Crisis Center and is excited to be able to continue the tradition of being able to provide support to such a beneficial local organization. West High Speech and Debate found great success in Bettendorf in November, with several of the finalist spots being taken by West students. Also, West's robotics team is now leading the state after its strong first meets. Finally, I would like to mention a few of the upcoming musical events that are taking place at West High in the weeks before winter break. Tonight, the Chamber Orchestra will be performing with guest harpsichordist Jason Weinberger. Tomorrow, the Symphonic Band and Wind Ensemble will have their concerts, followed by performances of varsity and freshman band next week. On December 22nd, the show choirs will debut their full performances at the Winter Swing Show. Next week, the West High Orchestras will have their winter concert. And finally, this Saturday, West High will host its annual Jazz Cafe in our new cafeteria. We have the honor of working with two renowned New York-based musicians for the performance and are sure that the event will be a tremendous success. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the update. Appreciate it. Next up from Liberty High, I think we have Kate Randall and a guest. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
My son.
Hi, I'm Kate Randall.
And I'm Sushma Santana.
We are the Liberty High School representatives for this evening, and we are so excited to update you guys.
So at the end of November, Liberty High Difference Makers wrapped up a great month of their No Shave November fundraiser. Teachers were split into teams, and things got pretty competitive, with classes raising hundreds of dollars in just days. The grand total came in as over $4,000, all to support children battling life-threatening diseases. And the teachers that raised the most money were seen in the school the next day with their beards shaved into bolts on both sides and dyed purple.
The Liberty High basketball teams are off to a great start in their first year in the MVC. The boys basketball team is currently 2-1, and the girls team is playing tonight, hoping to bring the record 3-3. The wrestling team has been competitive and has placed in the top 3 in their last 2 tournaments. And the combined swim team with West High is also off to a great start to their season.
At the end of the first trimester, Liberty High Peer Assistant and Leadership Team, or PALS, organized a B is for Bullets basketball game with a theme centered around belonging, where students in our adaptive PE class and PALS class played basketball against Liberty teachers and staff at the end of tri-assembly. The students were really supportive, and the PALS team beat the teachers 19-9.
This past Saturday, the Liberty Music Program had its 2nd annual winter showcase. The show featured Liberty's show choir, Storm, Liberty's 3 jazz choirs, Voltage, Spark, and Amplify, as well as the jazz band and numerous solo acts. They also performed pieces they had been working very hard on since the beginning of the school year, which was also followed by a reception in the Commons.
Liberty has recently started a food and clothing pantry in the building. Heba, our student family advocate, has been working very hard to organize the space and get donations to stock it. Everything in the pantry will be available to Liberty students who need it. Student Senate recently held a clothing drive in school where hundreds of articles of clothing were collected, and they all went directly to support the pantry.
In addition to clothing, Liberty Student Senate has organized a food drive to the Cross Park Road Hy-Vee on December 16th from 10 to 6. Students will be at Hy-Vee handing out lists of items that we need to support the pantry. Shoppers can buy these items with the rest of their groceries if they wish and leave it with us, as we will take everything back to the Liberty Pantry. We are hoping to collect enough items to be able to send bags with Liberty students over winter break.
Liberty's National Honor Society chapter has kickstarted a very successful peer tutoring program available to all Liberty students. During Liberty time, students who need help in a certain subject can go to the library, where a number of NHS leaders are available to help them with whatever they need, from help understanding concepts and studying to organization and public speaking skills. We have heard amazing feedback from the students who have attended, as well as from their teachers and parents, that this program has really helped students succeed in their classes.
Thank you so much for your time, guys.
The update, thank you. Next up, we have Brady Shutt from ICEA. And I'm wondering if you have a Liberty bolt in your beard.
There's a long story with that. My team did win, but yeah, anyway, it's too long of a story. So, President Godwin, Superintendent Murley, directors, I just have a very simple message tonight, and it's just on behalf of the teachers, thank you for your service. You know, we have a fantastic group of people here administratively and teachers that are in the room and all of you. And I think it's important just to remember we're all here to help kids, and that's really the focus. And I appreciate everything you're doing in that regard and the administrative teams are doing. So we'll have tough things that'll come up, obviously, throughout a school year, but we just really appreciate everything you're doing, so thank you.
Thank you, Brady. The appreciation's mutual, too. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll move into community comment. First up, we've got Susan Brennan with a check presentation, I think.
Thank you. Good evening. So we're here tonight to receive the proceeds from this year's Run for the Schools. We have members from the Iowa City Road Races with us to present the check, but before I introduce the chair of the board, I would like to thank them from the foundation staff and the board of directors of the foundation. This run is truly a labor of love. These folks are avid runners, and they've turned their passion into something that just really benefits our area schools. And I can tell you, from attending their board meetings for the last 4 years, they take 1 month off after the race to relax and recoup, and the very next month they're back at it planning the next year's race. And so it takes an awful lot of planning to pull off a run of this caliber. And this year's run was extra special because it was the 20th anniversary of the run and its incredible impact that it has had on our schools. I'd also like to thank Midwest One. They are the title sponsor of this run and have been for the last 20 years, and so they certainly deserve our gratitude. It is my pleasure to introduce the chair of the Run for the Schools Iowa City Road Races, Joan DePranger, who also happens to be a teacher librarian at Horn Elementary. I'm happy to. Thank you for inviting us here for this presentation. It is our honor to contribute this money, and I'll introduce the other board members that could be in attendance tonight. Bob Opliger, Matt Fetkether from Midwest One, who is also in charge of race operations, Beth Menser, and Dave Mosier, all on the board. Susan is very humble about her, what contributions she also does. She has a great perspective from a foundation point of view, and Teresa Weeks, also on the foundation, does a lot of work, and we truly appreciate it. Tonight we have a check for $23,089.88. In addition to that, $7,600 has already been distributed to individual schools. All but 3 elementaries hit the level of participation, so they were all able to receive those additional funds to the PE departments and the libraries. All 4 junior highs, and then all 4 high schools also received additional funds. So in addition, so the total was really contributed was $30,689.88 that we have now donated. And I look around the room and I see a lot of high school students who also participated and volunteered their time. I see runners out here, teachers, and a lot of you who either volunteered or participated, and we truly appreciate it. We had over 1,400 runners and nearly 100 volunteers. So it does really take a lot of people that to make this all work, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, sure. All right, we're gonna grab a quick photo. Is that okay? We'll do it quickly.
While we're lining up, I want to add one piece of information. I term now the senior member of this group. And,
I'm not sure.
and one of the factoids that we argue about a little bit is if we had been a little more successful this year, in the 20 years we would have totaled $1 million in contributions. Wow. There's a dispute as to how much we've raised for the place.
Yeah, one more thank you for all of the hard work. For 20 years, raising that kind of money for our district, it's fantastic. Can't thank you enough. That was really fun. Next up, we've got Rebecca Tilley on behalf of the Lucas PTO, and following Rebecca is Charlie Eastham.
Hi. So, as I mentioned, I'm speaking on behalf of the Lucas PTO, where I'm currently serving as secretary. At a transition meeting for the opening of the new Hoover, the Lucas PTO became aware that the district's busing policies are under review. And while we really appreciate that the district is exploring how best to maximize the use of our limited resources, we're extremely unhappy to learn that there are two mobile home neighborhoods historically within the Lucas boundaries, specifically Modern Manor and Sunrise Village off of Scott Boulevard, that may not have busing to the new Hoover Elementary School. So in 2016, when discretionary busing, which I understand is now being described as attendance support busing, was being cut by the district, the Lucas PTO advocated to ensure that this group of students continued to receive discretionary busing because they were 1.9 miles away from Lucas Elementary and did not have a safe way to walk to school. And at the time, the board voted specifically for this particular group of students to receive discretionary busing. So with the move to New Hoover, our understanding is that these students will be 1.8 miles away from school, and there are no sidewalks available at this time for them to safely walk to school. So with this history, and despite functionally being in the exact same circumstance, we've learned that parents of these students will have to fill out paperwork to determine if there is a sufficient need for busing to be provided. So this will require our family student advocate to coordinate with these families to make sure that the paperwork is turned in. And it will likely require that classroom teachers take up some of their conference time to fill out the paperwork while they have interpreters available to them. It's the opinion of the Lucas PTO that this requirement places a disproportionate burden on a vulnerable population of students. And we've already clearly established that the transportation need of this population group and those circumstances are not changing when the boundaries change. So the Lucas PTO has two requests. One, we'd like for continued attendance support busing routes for the Modern Manly and Sunrise Village neighborhoods after the boundaries shifts moves them to the new Hoover without requiring additional application or paperwork from these families. And secondly, we would like to recommend that the board establish a process requiring proposals for administrative or policy changes to include an assessment of the effects that those changes will have on vulnerable populations of students. And I mention this specifically because I suspect that there are other pockets of students here in the district that are currently receiving busing, for example, and would be similarly negatively impacted by these changes as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Charlie Eastham.
Thank you, President Goodwin and other members of the board. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about school funding. You're going to look at the district's annual progress report later in your meeting tonight. And that annual progress report on page 61 has a chart that compares the property tax rates for the Iowa City District against 7 other comparable sized school districts in the state. And the chart shows that the property tax rate for this district is $13.96 per $1,000 of taxable valuation. And compared to other districts in the state, that's around $1 to comparison to the Des Moines district, $3 less than the other districts. I think many of us take the charts and information in the various reports seriously. So I wondered what this chart actually means. One, it means that the district, could mean anyway, that the district's property tax rate is less than the other districts because we're not doing as good a job educationally as we should be doing in terms of raising revenue that produces good educational outcomes. If that's the case, then this chart to me indicates that there's a ready solution to some of our physical problems by simply increasing the property taxes. I also know enough about state school funding to know that that's probably not the case. In which case, that is, I don't think the district actually could raise or increase the property tax rate and generate a substantial additional revenue for use locally. So then why is the chart in this report? I'm not sure, but I think the implication is that, the intended implication is that the district has a very low property tax rate because we're doing something much better than the other districts. I don't think that really is the case. So I guess I'm here to suggest that we look carefully at the reports, at the charts and data that are in these reports, and make sure that they're conveying a message that is accurate and relevant. And I'm not quite so sure that these comparison of property tax rates meet that criteria. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie. That concludes community comment. We'll move into the agenda approval process.
I'd just like to make one change to the agenda. Items H3 and I1 are actually the same items, and I'd like to take out H3 and just discuss it at I1.
Okay, any other requests for modifications to the agenda? Is there a motion to approve the agenda with the deletion of H3?
So moved. Second.
Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you, Kim. Moving into the consent agenda. Phil, do you want to give an update on the bills first?
Yeah, we had $6 million and change in disbursements, $3.3 million out of the GO bond, $1 million in general fund spending. Had several questions I went over with Les on. One thing that I hope everyone pays attention to is what's happening in the Waukee School District and with some of their spending and credit card usage, and I discussed some of that with Les. I don't think anyone else, did someone else audit the books this go around?
No.
Okay. I know sometimes it's a challenge for us to get in there, but I want us to recognize the importance for us to do it. And it's not the thing we only do in times when we're tight, but it's also something we do in times when we're flush, because we have to make sure that we are spending our money wisely and things along those lines. There's some opportunities, I feel, with the fiscal plant to do some more repairs on some of our business. We seem to have a problem with cooling units and things like that, and that's something I can discuss in operations. But the questions raised were answered, and everything seems to be in order.
Very good. Any items to pull?
I don't need to, excuse me, I don't need to pull it. I just had a question. If Dwayne can just give a quick explanation. What's the redesign at Tate? Like, what's going on with that?
Currently, we're adding classrooms to the original design. There'll be 6 classrooms plus a multi-purpose type room. It'll be a little bit larger, plus a revised gymnasium. It's still a gym there, but it's not of the same scope that was there previously.
And those changes are still expected to keep with the budget?
It's going to help, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah. And one big change was, we originally had the gymnasium as the storm shelter, which was more than enough capacity, but we made the design change and made the classrooms the storm shelter, the new classroom wing, so it reduced the amount of concrete on the roof that we had to pour and things like that. So we did some real serious value engineering, but I think it's going to help.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Eystone voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Thank you very much. And with that vote, I would like to recognize our new Director of Equity and Employee Relations, Jeremy Tabor. Just want to say hey and I mean, if you want to come and introduce yourself, that's great too, but we're really pleased to have you here. I think this is day one, and we're thrilled to have you here.
Yes, I just want to take a quick second and thank the board and the rest of the administrative team for this opportunity. Very happy to join the Iowa City Community School District, and I look forward to having more fun with everyone as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much and welcome. Thank you for that. Now, public hearings. We have one, West High School Phase 2.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the West High School Phase 2 project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on November 13th, 2018. Notice of the public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on November 14, 2018. The district will receive bids on this project at 2 p.m. on December 18, 2018 at the Educational Service Center located at 1725 North Dodge Street, Iowa City, Iowa, 52245. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on November 14, 2018. Are there any questions from the board? Questions from the public?
Concludes our public hearing. Thank you so much, Paul. We'll move into the presentation section. First up, we have the teaching and learning reports. And I believe, who's going to be leading that for us? It's a group. Yep.
This is a team effort, so
Yep.
we have lots of people that have participated in this.
Sure. Yeah, go for it, and I'll take the first slide here.
All right, tonight we have 4 teaching and learning reports that we're going to share with you, and each of our team members will go over a few main highlights, key takeaways, and then open it up for questions and answers. Matt and I will talk about the APR, Adam with the tech report, Diane with SIAC, and Susie with the witness report.
So I'm not going to try to make your head hurt and scroll through here. Maybe we'll try to catch up if you have a question on a slide. But I think just what we wanted to do with the APR was hit a couple highlights with you. One thing to note is all of this data you would have already seen in place somewhere. This is usually a report we would deliver early in the fall, and it's kind of a review of the past academic year. So none of the academic data is new data in that regard. The enrollment data would have been last year's enrollment data. We will come back with an enrollment report soon that will kind of give you the update for this current year. So we'll probably run through some of that information quickly, but of course, if you have any questions, we're happy to answer those and go back to those. The first thing to touch on would be our enrollment from 17-18. We were up about 215 students. When you look at certified enrollment, obviously you get those decimals. We went from 13,981.63 in the certified enrollment to 14,197.58 in that 1 year change. So we were up at that 215.95. Low SES, we were up slightly from 37.3 to 37.4 percentage of our students qualifying for free and reduced price lunch. And our ethnic breakdown from 16 to 17, you would see us becoming more diverse, as has been the trend here in Iowa City. Our white population went from 58.4 to 57.6, and our minority population 41.6 to 43.4 to display that diversity we're talking about increasing in the district.
So following along with demographics, but not necessarily in order with the APR report, we include demographics around our special education population, English language learners, and pre-K students. And in there you see a 5-year history, and over the last 5 years, our special education, percentage of students in special education has decreased by 2%. Our English language learners, as I think that you're all well aware, have increased substantially over the last 5 years by 835 students. So last year we were serving 1,623 students. And our preschool, I know we've had a lot of focus and attention there most recently as well. You can see that we've grown by roughly 191 students over the last 5 years, with a total of 575 students receiving preschool programming last year.
And so then academic achievement-wise, you have a lot of academic achievement information there in the report, and a couple of the big chunks that you would see would be national percentile rank, which shows rank relative position within a group of students at the same grade or same time of the year. Then we also have national standard score data in there that describes the location, or the group's location on an achievement continuum. And then finally, you have a nice table there that shows percent proficient. Our national percentile ranks, to go all the way back to that first one where it talks about the rank or relative position of a group of students in the same grade and time of the year. We see proficiency ranges from 62 to 80 in reading, from 58 to 72 in math, and then 64 to 74 in science. You're going to see us come back and talk some more about success or challenges we have in front of us with those. Again, as we review this academic achievement data, we know that we have significant disparities in our different, subgroup data points when we look through that. The national standard score shows that we outperform national averages in all grades in all three subject areas, again, when looking at it from that gross perspective overall. And then percent proficiencies, you see that go from reading of 73.9 to 75.6, in math anywhere from that 70.8 range to 81.7. So we hold the line fairly well overall, but like we said, we'll come back to some of those challenges and work in front of us in those areas. Oops.
So takeaways then from Iowa assessments and other assessment data that we're looking at in this particular section is that we see our most discrepant groups continue to be our IEP students, or students receiving special education services, our English language learners, and our Black or African American students. We're also aware and cognizant of discrepancies of areas of subgroups that continue to exist for Hispanic Latino kiddos, as well as our free and reduced price lunch students. Some highlights, though, we've got now, the past 3 years, we've collected fast reading assessment data, and we're starting to see some positive gains for all students. And in that chart, you see 3 years ago that we were roughly 71% proficient, and last spring, we're at 75% proficient. Within that, of course, we're disaggregating our data just like we do for Iowa assessments, and we are particularly proud of seeing proficiencies climb for some of those subgroups that I just was pointing out as most discrepant. But with our Black and African American students, we've seen an increase from 45% proficient to 56% proficient over those 3 years. And our multiracial students have increased their proficiencies from 70% proficient to 76% proficient. Other highlights, particular to the high school kiddos, ACT scores continue to rank above both state and national averages, and our Iowa City graduation rate is at 90.2%.
And then a significant part of the report in there is always the behavior statistics, and you see information surrounding suspensions, office referrals, attendance, and mobility and stability statistics in there. We've continued to disaggregate the data along our referrals and for our suspensions. An area of emphasis for the district has been around how we handle defiance and disrespect and trying not to suspend for those behaviors. So I think when you see behaviors in those categories that are reaching that suspendable offense, those are pretty serious violations in that regard. We don't have all of the last 5 to 10 years historical data in there, but you would see a significant decline in that one category. I think other takeaways would be most discrepant group in suspensions and office referrals, again, is our Black and African American students. Some of the pieces we are doing to continually try to work and teach behaviors include our positive behavior intervention supports, PBIS model. Liberty High School has been very active in that this year from the secondary level to get that going. Our junior highs are doing it, and our following 2 high schools are kind of in a planning or prep year for that, and they already incorporate a lot of the different elements of that, as do all of our elementary schools. In MTSS, the multi-tier system of supports, really trying to work through all tiers of those. The first and most important one, of course, is what we're doing in the core, whether it's behavior or whether we're talking back to those academic pieces. That MTSS really has 2 sides to the triangle for us on that. And then, of course, the work we've talked about surrounding implicit bias and some next steps involving restorative justice to do that. And we've kind of talked at the work session about how the restorative justice part can work in concert with clear and consistent and appropriate discipline practices as well.
So within that report, then you see several other departments represented, and we're not prepared to necessarily share earnings around that. So with that, then we would open it up for questions.
Just a couple quick ones. So we had 625 students take the ACT. What's the total number of students that had the opportunity to take the ACT?
Well, total number of students would be any of our high school students could have the opportunity to take it. Typically it's our juniors that are the most frequent registrant of that.
I think it'd be interesting to see the percentage. And it strikes me that, our graduation rate is a point below the state's rate for graduation. And it's concerning when we look at the graduation rate of Hispanic students and our black students. What opportunities do you think we have there to keep those kids in school and graduating?
Sure, I think we've talked about that several times with you guys about some of the programming efforts we're trying to do that to address academic achievement, which of course leads to credit acquisition for those students and then ultimately graduation. And so when I was talking about PBIS or MTSS or when we've talked about AVID programming, really when we look at those different support structures in place, those are all of the things we're trying to do to increase graduation effort. And the most critical component of that is ninth grade credit acquisition and trying to loop those students into a successful experience right away in their 9th and 10th grade years so they accumulate those credits and then are set up for a successful graduation opportunity. I think we had a work session from the equity committee that kind of talked about graduation rates, and Amy and I have talked to you guys a few different times about different opportunities to try to address that achievement gap, which I think ultimately leads to why you see those kind of post numbers of why the graduation rate the way it is for some of those subgroups.
Okay. And I guess Adam isn't going to chime in on tech, but I just wondered if there was anything in our data to show an increase in proficiency that can be attributed to our tech in the classroom.
Adam he will come back with the tech report, but I think just like we look at anything with all of the different pieces we implement, we know what impacts achievement is solid instruction in the classroom and making sure that instruction matches the standards. The technology is a vehicle for us to help deliver that instruction more effectively. And I think it's hard to always pinpoint, exactly what is making the difference in that regard. So to say that technology's making the difference, I think that'd be selling our teachers short. I really think what they choose to do and how they choose to incorporate that technology and make it a successful experience for our students is the best measurable.
I got two questions. One, and because we have seen some of this data before, this is more probably reminding me. Early on, I think it's like page 12, there's the cohort charts as they go up, and the reading one for the 2018, 2019 graduates just drop instead of continuing to go up, and I can't remember if we discussed any thoughts around that one. And the other question, or maybe it's more of a request than a question, we have kind of year by year all the different results, and you already mentioned the ELL numbers don't look great, but they're in there, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. I was wondering if there's some way to say, this ELL student's been in our ELL program for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and see their progress. Because you kind of look at the different years and it bounces quite a bit, but it could be the 8th grade class, our 8th graders who just moved into the district, and I don't know if that's reflective of what's going on necessarily, unless they've been here since 2nd grade, then it is kind of reflective of what's going on, so I'd be curious to look at that different.
And you bring up a good point. Once they become proficient, they're going to be taken out of that ELL programming too, and so you have to think about
Right.
the fact that our proficient ELL kiddos are not even back in
Right.
those numbers for a reason. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, how long does it take them to be in our system to become proficient would be something good to monitor as well. We don't do that currently, that I'm aware of.
And the first question on the reading
Oh, sure.
cohort stuff?
Sorry, forgot about that one. I was trying
All
to
right.
digest your ELL question. We have looked at that before, and I can tell you, I don't think we've been able to determine a solid reason for why that continues to happen. It is something we see reflected in this. We know that obviously our state assessment's changing here, you know, and it happens in that one subject area. It's not something we see happen in the other subject areas. So most likely it's, I mean, we haven't been able to determine what's misaligned, but it's a misalignment between what's being instructed in that, at that grade level for us, and then what's being assessed in that regard. The positive news for us is even though there's a dip, the score's still well above, you know, the state and national average, above that national standard score for the rest of the nation. But obviously, we don't like to see it moving in the wrong direction when that happens.
And I lied, I got one more comment. I know it's just kind of going through, looking at the proficiency numbers of all different subgroups, and you look at reading and math, and it has science in there. I noticed numbers on science are generally, they're higher than the math and the reading, and I didn't know, is that a take more on the assessment process, or you know, what we're doing in the teaching and stuff, and it's just kind of, if it's something we're doing great, then figure out how to apply that everywhere else, but I would assume that maybe the assessment has a lot to do with that. I don't really know a lot about our science assessment standards.
No, I would just talk about kits and hands-on learning.
Yeah. I think from the success I've seen in our secondary system for the science team would be that they've probably been the most involved in trying to identify essential understandings, and then also alignment of assessments to know and be able to measure student mastery of those learnings. And that's something that all of our teams are involved in: math, social studies, language arts, all of their curricular areas down to the specials in that regard. But I would say our science team was early on in that effort, and they've continued that work and probably have the best alignment of some of that through the district. Not that those other teams aren't working hard or trying to get to that point, but I think that's somewhat reflected in those scores, because we have confidence then in what is core and what we should be teaching, and then how we're assessing that and making instructional change after that, and just repeating that cycle. So that would be my take on why I think we continue to see the science one higher in that regard. I think Amy was going to mention some probably the hands-on opportunities for elementary students, but I'll let her cover that.
So the fact that we have the 3 science kits at each of our elementary grade levels, I think is impactful. The AEA went to quite a bit of work to align right away when the next generation science standards came out to look at their kits again and align it better. So they selected new kits and rolled those out across our AEA, and actually other districts across eastern Iowa as well that take advantage of FOSS. So those would be some things I would think about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for this report. I always appreciate seeing all this data in one place, so thank you. I have a couple questions, but I'm going to start with the hardest one. So looking at page 29, where we see the Iowa assessment results, and I just picked this page because it's got a lot of data on it. You could find the same information with all the different assessments. What are your thoughts about why the numbers are going down over the past 5 years continually?
I'll start with that, yeah. So, yeah, I just want to remind everyone that the last 3 years' worth of data in the table is kiddos that haven't necessarily been in our system for that full year. So in the first 2 years in the table, full academic year students were pulled. I think depending on what subject area you're talking about, we definitely are seeing our challenges. I went about thinking about when our years that we were having the highest amount of success versus what years were we seeing our lowest amount of success. And I think the thing that's hard to see is knowing the kind of hard work that our teachers are putting in, the admin team is putting in, and not to see some of those results pop up like we would like them to. Again, I would go back to our FAST assessments, which are indicating to us that we are making progress, and as we continue to watch our subgroups, employ different reading strategies, bring on different curriculum, add interventions, we also know that we have to circle back to strengthening our core instruction. So while we might have a litany of interventions available to our students, we really have to go back and think about core instruction. We cannot intervene our way out of 30% of our students not being proficient. We do know that our demographics continue to change, and we've got some challenges with, students coming to us not speaking English, and those kiddos aren't pulled out of the data anymore. But that doesn't mean that we're not ready for that challenge and prepared to continue to figure out, what works best for those students and what's the best way to program for our students that aren't having success.
Yeah, I think the piece I'd add on is similar to what Amy talked about. I mean, I think it really goes back to our core instruction and looking at, and to say this the right way, I think is essentially we're receiving more students that we aren't successful with. We know they fit the demographic that we're not being as successful with. And I think so then that challenges to look at our core instruction to say, how do we get better, right? We have to get better for all of those students, because the students that are succeeding in the current model, we're not getting more of those students, right? We're getting more students that we're struggling to meet their needs and do that with. And so I think that forces us to raise our game to say our core has to look different, our interventions have to look different. We have to continue to get better in that regard because we're serving everybody, and we have to be successful for all those kids. So I think it's a hard challenge. I think, like Amy said, part of the frustrating thing for us is we feel like we know the right things to do, and we're trying to step into those and implement those pieces, and then so not to see that reflected in the data does become discouraging. But I do feel confident that, based on what we're being told we should be doing and the things we should be implementing and working towards, those are the things we're committed to doing. Yeah, thank you. And I've asked this before, and I'll just ask again. It would be really great if we could see the students, the black students, disaggregated by ELL and non-ELL.
We've actually
to get a better understanding of what's going on there.
We're actually doing that right now. We're in the midst of doing that. We have Sangha, think of Sangha's last name, sorry.
Kim.
Sangha Kim, working on that particular set of data. So, within our subgroups that are most discrepant by race and ethnicity, how many of those kiddos are receiving ELL services versus special education, coming from poverty? So that's something that we've asked the U of I to do, and they're working on that right now for us.
Thank you.
So quick question surrounding our post-secondary plans. Do we track them besides asking what their intentions are? So I see that we have 766 students who said they intended on extending their educational career. Do we check in, or you're done and good luck here?
That's probably a whole follow-up conversation we can do with you, because a lot of that process has started to change for us with some legislative changes. So we use a KNAV system that really starts to align course taking to their interests. And then as far as follow-up, I'm not sure how we do on a follow-up end, but I think while they're in our system, trying to better align them towards those interests is something that we're heavily involved in through that ICAP plan. And that would be something we could come back in an education committee, and Laura and Diane are involved in that work. And we could definitely have probably give you some more details of what that looks like, or even plans we hope to implement and change. Part of the problem right now is a lot of that's rested on the guidance counselor's shoulders, but if we have 4 of those in a comprehensive high school, to get to 1,500 students and do that in a meaningful way is a struggle. And so that's what that team's involved in, is trying to say, how do we share that responsibility and make sure every kid has an opportunity to have an in-depth conversation around where they're going and what is that path, so we're not just saying college and then what, right, or college with a question mark.
Okay. And then
can I just share just a little bit too, Ruthina? Sorry. We do bring to you, the last couple of years, we brought a post-secondary report that we shared with the board that does show, for instance, how many kids actually attend college, how many kids graduate, how many kids have to take a remedial course in college. So we'll share that information again this spring once it is available to us.
In the spring, okay. All right. And is that report done by subgroups? So based on the information that's listed here, do we get it how many white, Asian, black?
Parts of it are.
Great, thank you.
Was that a state-produced one for us, Diane?
The state produces a state report. We're able to access that information through Ed Insight, and then I just adjust the state report and include all of our information, so you get a comparison between how we're doing and how the state is doing across our area.
Yeah, and I think it goes 5 years out.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can get a little bit from it. I just wanted to make sure before we leave that Charlie's question on the differences in the tax rates, and Les can correct me on this too, but a lot of it has to do with evaluation. And Iowa City School District has either the highest or the second highest real estate evaluation. I think West Des Moines is higher. So even though our rate may be low, our valuation is high, so those enter into it. And those in Waterloo may be paying less, even though their rate is higher than ours, just based on the valuation of their properties. But
that would be correct for the most part. The other thing that is that, to Mr. Easton's comments, is that the district doesn't have the ability to change that rate. It's driven by the aid and levy worksheet, so it's a statewide formula that essentially drives that rate. So outside of the debt service, which is voter approved, is primarily driven by that formula.
And I'd just offer that the other districts that are represented there are part of the Urban Education Network, and that's been a consistent comparative statistic that's been included in annual progress reports since before I became superintendent of the district.
I don't have any questions, just, because we have seen this data before, we've talked a lot about it. I think it just, again, emphasizes kind of where our disparities are and where our opportunities are for growth, especially for our students of color. And, just re-emphasizes the urgency and the priority of the work that we're doing, both at the board table and what you folks are doing, down to the teachers in the classroom to really get robust MTSS, PBIS, some of our programs like AVID going, and just to keep that support from the board, because we need to see those numbers move, and there's a lot of work to do in a lot of different areas. So thank you for this, and thank you then also for that work that you're all doing to close those gaps.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you, Amy and Matt, for the review. Next up, we've got the SIAC update.
I'll take that one, and it's a bit of a shorter report than maybe the last one, just a couple pages there. I wanted to also answer Director Hemingway's question about the ACT. Those 625 students, that is just our graduating class.
Okay.
So about 625 out of 1,000, a little bit more than 1,000, so approximately 62% of our graduating students took the ACT.
okay, thank you.
But back to the SIAC report, we met last March, so this is just a compilation of the input. They are asked to give input on our educational goals and provide that to the board, so this is meeting that state mandate that they do. So you can just kind of read through their input and take that into consideration as you continue to make goals for the district. One thing that struck out to me, I guess, as I read them, was the emphasis on disparity, the emphasis on diversity and on equity. And I noticed it was mentioned in those comments at least 7 different times. And it just got me curious. So I looked back 3 years ago at the SIAC report. And although there was a note in there about equity of opportunity for all students, it surely didn't have the specificity or the emphasis I think that this SIAC report does, which to me just reflects the work of the board, how you've helped keep that in front of us, and then the work of our staff, just to make sure that equity, diversity is just part of our fabric now. It's our conversations, it's what we do every day, and really what we're about, and I think that's reflected in the comments that you see here as well. And for you to know, too, we are adjusting the format of our SIAC this year. We're going to be meeting more often. We already had one meeting last week, and we have several more planned so that we can give that committee a little bit more opportunity to digest this information and provide some more specific feedback. So you'll be getting another report next year.
I'd just like to make a quick comment on that I think that's great that we're changing it up, because I think some of us have served on that committee before, and I really think it can do a lot more than it has in the past. So I'm excited for that.
Any other comments or questions for Diane? Thank you for that summary. We can go to the tech report. Adam?
All right, so I have a report. There's a written version in the docs. I'm going to go through and hit a few highlights. One of the things that might jump out a little bit. The last couple of years when I've given this report, it's focused heavily on operational IT, on infrastructure improvements, device access initiatives, things like that. And those are still ongoing programs. We continue to work to invest in infrastructure upgrades, access improvements, that sort of thing. There are classroom upgrades that are still underway district-wide. In this report, though, I highlighted some of the teaching and learning side emphases that my department has had through the last couple of years, but particularly the past year and then into this year. One of the areas that I wanted to hit upon is work in terms of computer science curriculum and computational thinking. This is something to me that's really exciting. Just in the past 2 months, the district has received 3 separate grants related to support for computer science curriculum development and implementation at all levels, elementary and secondary. One of those projects is research collaborative that the district is part of, along with 2 other districts, one in Alabama, one in Illinois, and a research team, and that one is funded through the National Science Foundation, essentially with a focus of developing a K-8 computational thinking, which you can think of as a broader term that encompasses computer science and also includes some other foundational skills that contribute to student success and achievement in other areas beyond computer science, but to develop a computational thinking pathway that we can implement with fidelity grades K-8, ultimately district-wide. That's a 3-year project, so it will take some time to be fully implemented. But our driving emphasis in terms of our application to be part of that project, and one of the things that the research team has been most focused upon in their work with us, has been looking at the equity components of access to computational thinking curriculum, computer science. So we're very excited about that. One of the components of that goes along with the second collaborative grant that we are a part of is another research-driven project that's looking at next generation science standards and computational thinking alignment. That project's specifically looking at the junior high grade levels, but we're actually looking at aligning the curriculum that we implement for computational thinking, making sure that that's covering both computer science standards and next generation science standards, which we already have to cover in grades K-8. It's really hard to get into the elementary schedule, so this will allow us to do that, get better bang for our buck in terms, not just financially, but otherwise, in terms of getting that curriculum into classrooms. So we're excited about that project as well. That's going to work, again, with a focus at the junior high level. Excuse me. And then the final grant is a grant through the state of Iowa that's going to provide financial support for us to train secondary teachers, so teachers in our junior highs and high schools, as it relates to delivery of computer science curriculum, which we think will allow us to offer a little bit more diversity in terms of our computer science coursework at the high school level, also deepen our computer science and engineering focus at the junior high level. So excited about all that work. It's all underway, and things have moved really quickly just in the last couple of months in terms of getting support for those initiatives. One of the real keys when implementing technology is providing adequate professional development. You know, Matt had mentioned that ultimately technology is a vehicle, it's a tool that we're making use of in our classrooms. Quality instruction is what is going to drive student achievement, but we need to make sure that our teachers have the ability to maximize their use of that tool, their use of technology and the various tools that are available within that scope. And one of the projects we've worked on for the last couple of years has been work with our IDS innovation team, specifically targeted to elementary schools that are doing classroom technology and student device upgrades. So the IDS innovation team targets those schools. We've had a third-party company that's come in and provided some technology integration support in those schools as well as our junior highs, along with our IDS innovation team. And as we've gone through that process from year 1, then year 2, and now we're in year 3, the process has really matured to the point that last year when we collected data, we found that teachers were far more comfortable and integrating technology, and obviously this is oversimplified, but integrating technology at a much deeper level when they were involved in that targeted training. So right now we are working on a plan that will scale that out. So we'll be leveraging that IDS innovation team, particularly coordinated through Andrew Fenstermaker, who now is in a full-time role within that group, leveraging that team to work with buildings and provide support across the district. Beyond that, we've also, last year, we piloted for the first time a summer technology PD catalog. We had about 300 teachers who participated in that, which was an exciting thing, especially for a year one. This year, we're working to get that catalog developed and published before winter break. So teachers will have time to really plan some of those opportunities, which include short hit workshops all the way to courses that can be taken for license renewal credit, but getting those opportunities to teachers as early as possible so that they can work those into summer plans. We're also working again through the IDS innovation team to get feedback with regard to what would be most effective to offer during that time. Where's the most demand? Not necessarily even in terms of just tools, like I want to see Google training, but more in terms of what do you want to do in the classroom? What are your goals? What are your pain points? Where are you running into barriers? And then what can we implement to address that through training? So that's a real focus for us. And then the final thing that I wanted to hit on, this actually speaks to Director Hemingway's point a little bit. It's very difficult to evaluate the effectiveness of any initiative within schools, particularly a wide-ranging one like technology. I mean, technology is really many initiatives that we're implementing all at the same time. So teasing out, achievement aspects from any one of those is difficult. I can look at, for instance, Kirkwood Elementary, where they've found tremendous success implementing Lexia, and that's driven by device access. They need technology to do that. And when I talk to teachers, they say it's been tremendously successful, and they wish we had more technology to implement it further. So I can, get feedback like that. But one of the instruments that we have available to us at no charge to the district, the state makes it available, and it is the standard around the state, is the Clarity Survey, which is produced by a company called Bright Bites, and we administer that each year. This past year, we had some really exciting results. We saw that in terms of the district, we set high scores for all 4 areas. So this is an evaluation instrument that's looking both at the operational IT, tech support, availability, access, infrastructure. It's also looking at technology integration, teacher comfort with technology, teacher use of technology, but we also survey students, and we get student perspective on use of technology, depth of interaction, frequency of interaction, that sort of thing. And the idea is you're producing a pretty comprehensive ed tech program evaluation. And this past year, we set high scores for the district in all 4 categories that report looks at. Not only set high scores all time for these, I think, 6 years we've been doing this survey. We were also, for the first time ever, above state and Grantwood AEA region averages for all 4 of those. We received our first exemplary score for a category, which was for access, which speaks to some of the improvements we've been doing there. And to me, the most impressive stat that jumped out and that speaks to the fact that what we're doing is working, and I'm really confident in saying that I think we should keep doing these things, is that with the exception of Liberty High School, which had no previous year benchmark to compare to, we saw year-to-year improvement in the overall score in every single building in the district. And that's something also that's never happened for us. So exciting things going on. To me, it reinforces that we are on the right track. We still have a long way to go in a lot of these areas. But those are the takeaways I have for you.
Thank you. I just want to commend you on the computational thinking component of the work that you were presenting. It's very clear, if you look at the evolving workforce and the jobs needed now and in the future, our public school system nationally is not producing enough students who understand computational thinking, computer science, that kind of thing. We're just not producing enough students with the skills for the jobs that are there now and will be growing. Every company is becoming a technology company, whether whatever its core mission is. And so I commend the district for that focus and getting some grants to help us get that implemented, and hopefully that can continue to grow. Other comments, questions for Adam?
Just thank you for a super detailed report and taking this complex stuff, and especially your emphasis on like what's happening in the classroom and how it's impacting kids. So,
Yeah.
good report. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. So up next, the wellness, Susie.
Hi. So the wellness policy report is in your packet, and I just wanted to bring a few highlights to your attention. The wellness policy is required, but it's also a very important tool that the district uses to promote student and staff wellness, prevent and reduce childhood obesity, and provide assurance that our school meals are meeting the federal requirements. So what has happened since you've last heard a report is that we have updated our health curriculum to provide current and consistent education to students in content areas related to healthy lifestyles, making healthy choices, mental health, and social emotional learning. Our nutrition services program continues to collaborate with local agencies such as Farm to School to increase the amount of fresh and local produce served to our students, which I do want to highlight that because I think it's pretty phenomenal. Right here. This is pounds that we've purchased of local produce and how that's increased over the years. And then we've also implemented guidelines for foods that are brought to school and shared with other students, like for classroom celebrations, to ensure that the food is healthier and also that it's safer for those students with food allergies. So that's been successful. So we still have some work to do in evaluating the policy and making sure that it's being implemented consistently across buildings. So that's what's going to happen before the end of this school year. We also make sure that we're compliant with all the requirements. So there's a lot of different requirements that we have to look at. It's the WIC Reauthorization Act, the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, Smart Snack Guidelines, and then the USDA school meal requirements, and then there's also some state requirements. Questions?
So it's kind of, see how it goes here. So Trump administration proposed some changes to the food recently to make it less healthy and more enticing to eat, is the way that I read it. But if I look at our numbers, we're serving more meals to kids
Exactly.
now, so I don't know.
That's a great point, Paul. So I think we don't give our kids enough credit. They want healthy food. They eat healthy food. If we provide healthy food, they're going to eat it. And many, many of our students are hungry, and they rely on our school meal program for breakfast and lunch. That's two main meals of their day, and some do not have much of a meal in the evening or on weekends. So I think that would be a step backwards. And then the USDA school meal guidelines were so outdated and finally have been updated in the last couple of years to ensure that we have less fat, less sugar content, low sodium, more fruits and vegetables.
And then just one side note, under student and family activities that you listed in there, one that maybe you could add back if it was ever listed is the track meets.
Oh, yeah.
Just,
Did I miss that?
It's just not on that part of it, so it may be somewhere else, but I just think that's
Okay.
I've been to that the last few years, and the kids love it, and it's a good way to be outdoors and doing things, active things, all kids.
Absolutely, yes. And that was not intended to be removed. So we still do that. We've done that for, what we have, 50-some years now.
Any other questions? Phil?
Yeah, in our health education, in the K-6, you have alcohol, tobacco, and other drug education at that point. But I don't see it as we indicated in 12th grade or anything like that. And our incidence of tobacco and drugs in our school isn't really decreasing that way. Is there any, if you could just talk on that, or opportunities might be?
So essentially, that's still all included. All of these things that are in the K through 6 pretty much are continued through the 7th and 8th personal development courses. And then we just require 1 trimester of health in 9th through 12th grade. So those same topics are included. I just didn't elaborate on those topics. And then new this year is we've offered a couple of elective health courses to our high school. And I don't know if Diane wants to expand on that at all.
Sure. We have offered as an elective Relationships 101 and then Current and Critical Issues in Health. So if students wanted to, they could take a full year of health courses at the high school, and that's something we needed to do according to our offer and teach requirements through the state.
I had a couple comments. One, kind of under the bullet for PE.
Yes.
I guess it's always just bothered me that you can take a full academic load and get out of PE. I think that that's not wellness. And then, not that this is connected, but when we look at page 56 of our annual progress report, look at the number of kids with anxiety in 13-14, it was 223, and last year it's 400. ADHD, 923 in 13-14, and 1,400 last year. Most of the others have stayed relatively stable. And so I know, and this isn't here, this is nationwide, that we're just seeing an epidemic of kids with anxiety and some of these other mental health concerns. And so the more I think we can think about how something like physical education contributes to mental health, and then, I've said this before and I'll keep saying it, the more we can add kind of electives, and I just think we have to require social emotional learning at the secondary level, more than 1 trimester of health once. It's not enough. Our kids, not only do they not know computers, some of them just don't know how to get through a day. And it's serious enough that, we're seeing these reported. And so the more I think we can think about universal screenings for all of our kids at the secondary level, or all levels, to catch some of these. Obviously, we are doing a lot for school-based mental health services. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, it's not a drop in the bucket, considering the problems we have. And I know we're all kind of working on that. But the problems are here, and I think when you look at 400 kids, it doesn't seem like a lot in 14,000 kids. But the degree of suffering that those kids go through is often life-threatening, because those are the kids that I'm working with every day. So just as we think about wellness, kind of including that mental and social emotional component, the more we can add in electives, and I think get to a place where we sort of have a requirement or embed it into our other learnings, kind of this social emotional piece, because that is pretty concerning, so.
Yeah, I agree with you. And those numbers for like anxiety and ADHD, that is just what's been reported by parents.
Right.
So those numbers are probably very low.
Right, I'm sure they're a lot higher than that, yeah.
Any other comments or questions for Susie? Thank you so much for the report. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Moving to the substitute staffing, I think, Jane, you're up.
This is a very similar looking report to what you received last year. You'll see some highlights for this year. We have done a really hard look at our substitute handbook that is produced online. We did a lot of reviewing, some changing and some updating on that. And thank you to Karen Nichols for keeping the most updated version of that on our website for our substitutes to be able to access. You'll see that we've expanded the building substitute positions across the district, including more buildings. That program began in 2016-17, and we have a celebration. This is the first time since we have initiated that program that all 6 of those tiny schools all have 2 building substitutes at this time. So Alexander was the last one to finally hire their second substitute, but all 6 of those buildings are currently then fully with two building subs that they use on a very regular basis. The other thing that we continue to have set up with that program is that when those substitutes are not needed within those particular buildings, or if one of the 2 are not needed, then they are either, we contact Jen Herrera here at the district, or that they've got some building partners that they'll contact right away, and they'll send those individuals in to fill another opening that we have in another building as well. We added the high schools to this particular program, and we've also included what we called some cluster elementary buildings, and those were put together mainly based on their proximity to each other. So if we needed to have people moving from one building to another either during the day or just because somebody's got a higher level of substitute or a higher level of absences in their building, that person can get to that other building a little more quickly. And that has been a little bit of a struggle right now. Two of our clusters are still working to secure a substitute for them to be able to share. And those would be our North Liberty group and also our Lemmy Longfellow and Hoover group. We're still working to hire someone. And also at the secondary level, we have two of the high schools, City High and Liberty High School. The other 4 attendance centers at the secondary are working to secure building subs. And part of the interfering factor with that one is we have some people who are certified teachers who are working in roles in the district already where they receive benefits, and some of them are hesitant to give those benefits up even for the higher pay rate. The reason that we stepped this out a little bit in the way that we did was also to keep that balance of securing some regular substitutes that know buildings and know the programs within the district, but also not deplete our substitute pool. We did have some concerns about that as well, because a lot of our subs come directly from that substitute pool. We're looking to have another group of candidates to enroll into our substitute services here. Graduation is this weekend, of course, locally, and outside of that, so we're hoping to pull in a few more subs. Talked to some colleagues this last week at a training, and again, this just continues to be a concern across the area. I included in here also a comparative page from last year's statistics to this year's statistics. Our overall rate is fairly similar to last year, although we have, when I gave the report last year was a little earlier in the year, so we did not have November data, and people worked really hard to get all that data crunched for us to be able to have those building level numbers as well as the district number. A year ago, at the end of October, we were at 91.4%. We're at 90% this year for a fill rate at the end of November, and that was with 66 days of instruction where we needed a teacher in the classroom. There have been more days of that, but not all of those days were days of instruction, so subs weren't necessarily required on those particular days. So I look at the number of absences. They have increased somewhat, but we also have more staff at this time as well.
Do we have a goal for fill rate? So how do we compare? I mean, I see that we went down a little bit since last year, but I mean, are we striving for 100%, 95%? Just
100% would be great,
Yeah.
and trying to do that along with helping support our teachers so that they're able to be in the classrooms more often. Part of what hits us right now too are the training opportunities that we provide in district. That we're taking staff out of the classrooms, and we continue to work on trying to come up maybe with some more creative ideas on providing that instruction to teachers when we know we're the ones that are pulling them out of the classroom. But I don't know that we've ever set a specific target other than trying to increase our level of fill rate. We have averaged better than the area when we compare. Grantwood ADA has a consortium where they feed out to area districts, and we've done better sometimes than the neighbors, but yeah, 100% would be our goal. I'd like to not see a slip below the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the elementary level, it's a little bit harder, I guess. But at the secondary level, where we have administrators and everything in the building, is there anything that we have that compels them or encourages them to fill those vacancies? Or do we have, and I'm assuming so, but do you have any data on that or fills? And just talking with other teachers, I know sometimes they'll fill in for someone who's gone, and I don't believe we compensate them for that when they do that.
We did that last year. We initiated that program, worked with the Teacher Association on developing an MOU where our teachers were compensated for providing that instruction. And we don't have the comparative data as far as the savings we looked at, because if there was no sub, it's hard to say that we had any cost savings with that. And we also have a lot of our people who will fill in for a colleague in a similar department and not ask for any compensation at that point either. A lot of our administrators fill in, our school guidance counselors, our people who are within the building. Our teacher librarians spend a lot of time filling in as well, because they know the kids, they know the curriculum, and they'll step in and support that. And I know, again, looking at Brady, I know there were a lot of times the teachers had those arrangements ahead of time with some of their colleagues. If there's no sub, they'll step in for each other.
So these numbers reflect those, I mean, those are taken out as well?
Correct. These are actual, Phil, it would not account for, there could be coverage in those classrooms. What the data that you see are the fill rates for actual absences that are in the system where we did not have an individual actually pick that job up and come and provide that instruction for the day. So in a lot of those cases, there was probably instruction that was provided. It was not by a substitute that was secured.
The only piece I would add to that is we have language in our negotiated agreement that actually discourages the use of other classroom teachers unless there's a case of an emergency for them to be as subs, notwithstanding the MOU that Jane talked about. Part of that is if they're in the classroom, they're giving up their preparation time or their ability to collaborate with their colleagues, which we think is important for their continual growth, and making sure that they are prepared to teach the classes that they want to teach. Using the MOU, we also want to value and respect the time they do give to step in and teach those other classes. So it is something we tried, but as our current agreement stands, it's a practice that, as I said, is not something that we should encourage our principals to go to as our sub-solution.
Okay. And as far as physical plant subs and things like that, do you have any data on that, or is that in this as well?
That's in the opening outline on the overview. Physical plant actually secures substitutes that are trained. Like, look at those guys. We increased one day sub and one night sub last year. That was the proposal, and they were able to fill both of those. So those people are already on staff for us, and they are paid to respond to openings as they occur. Sometimes it's from vacation and sometimes it's illness, but they are trained in all the buildings in the district and know the jobs.
But any holes there is in these numbers?
The numbers that you have are for teacher substitutes only.
Okay, but we don't have anything on the physical plant as far as any holes there might be there?
Yeah, we'd have to look at
Okay.
at the absence rates for them. And again, they don't fill every absence that they have. They'll either run shorter people. Jeff may fill in.
Well, our practice is beyond our teachers and some of our other critical positions. We don't always look to fill the positions because if we can get by without substitutes in those positions, we want to do that from a efficiency, effectiveness standpoint and a fiscal responsibility. And so it'd be hard to produce some of those results, Phil, because sometimes they're intentionally left without a substitute, looking at it from can we complete the work and can we get by. We focus on providing coverage in the classroom, and as we get further away from the classroom, we really try to balance the need of filling that position with the cost of filling that position.
I understand. But we've also increased a lot of our physical space in buildings, and I'm getting this from staff that, they didn't add anybody, and then when somebody's sick, it's even harder for them because we've already put a bigger load on them to begin with.
In fact, we have added personnel at the new buildings, but we operate just a little bit differently than what you might imagine substitute teachers. We have full-time day subs and full-time evening subs that fill the open spots as they occur, be it vacation, be it illness. But the critical times of the day, the buildings being open, the buildings being managed during lunch hours, the buildings being closed, never go undone. I mean, the subs that's their high priority items. So those kind of things get done every day. Evenings, we rotate. This building right here, we have a night sub working here tonight because our regular custodian is off. So they rotate through the buildings. They're very familiar with all the buildings, and I think we do a pretty good job of rotating those people through and covering the holes. If we can't cover those spots, say at lunchtime, we actually then use our craftsmen. So we have plumbers, electricians, carpenters that are on a rotation, and they go through that rotation and they know who's up next. So if we don't have enough day subs to cover those spots, we actually send craftsmen out there for an hour to take care of the problem. So very seldom does a building go uncovered at the critical times. And And if that happens, I don't think I've heard of it in maybe once or twice in 6 years I've been here.
Jane, I want to thank you and also Amy and Matt and anyone else who has had a part in changing the fill rates at the high-need elementary buildings. It's sort of unfortunate that this report doesn't include further back than just last year. If my memory serves me well, the numbers I looked at in 2015 or 2016 were vastly different between the high-needs elementary buildings and the other buildings, and I see tremendous numbers there. So thank you for the building subs. It's not a perfect program, but it's much better. So thank you to Matt and Amy as well for supporting that where you have. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think the building sub is one of the best developments. I'm guessing that we would make that position a lot sweeter if it had benefits and was just a regular part of the contract. I think then we wouldn't have those problems with people who don't want to give benefits. I think it'd be a great way for new teachers to come into the district and advance up kind of through the ranks. So I think that's something to think about moving forward, is what kind of benefit we would get out of just making those FTEs part of the contract.
I just have a quick question, maybe Jane or Chase or Steve can answer. With the early retirement, if people choose to take that, can they be rehired as a building sub and retain those benefits that they're getting from early retirement?
Technically, yes, there'd be a waiting period, but then it would also be a matter of how much they could work through the year. But, because you said a building sub, not just a sub.
Yeah, because a building sub would be a permanent position that doesn't get benefits, but if you took the early retirement and got your benefits, you're technically still being.
There'd be a cap.
Paul, I actually had this conversation with an IPERS representative today with the question, called with the question and anticipation of the presentation to staff on Thursday. I asked that question, and if they retire and begin receiving their IPERS benefits, they cannot return to IPERS covered employment for 4 months without jeopardizing their benefits. However, under the Affordable Care Act, we have to provide health insurance if they return within 6 months when they were previously receiving that. So to your question, if we did take one of those people back before 6 months, we would be required to provide them with health insurance if they had it previous to that.
So if they waited 6 months and then you hired them?
They could come in as a sub at the sub level, and then it would be a matter whether that position was an insurance-covered position. And our substitutes at this time are not. However, as you indicated, if they were part of the contract, that would change that discussion.
But these early retirees are going to have it anyway.
In theory, they would have to wait 4 months.
Right, in this case. This year's would be, yeah.
And I would say as a building sub, our goal, our target is to have folks there 5 days a week, and I'm not sure too many of our retired teachers that first or second year want to come back and do it full-time as a substitute.
You never know. You never know. I mean, they wouldn't have to do planning, they would be able to come in and do substitute, it would be different, so.
That's true. But a lot of them do, they're very willing and happy to come back in January and pick and choose their buildings in their curricular area, so too, and it's great to see people coming back.
That's great. Any more questions for Jane? Thank you for that report and update. We'll move on to the annual grounds care report, and that's going to be Dwayne.
Okay, no formal presentation, but did want to make a few comments and highlights that you'll find in the report. But before I do that, I think I really need to thank 3 gentlemen who have really made grounds as good as it is. It's Ben Grimm, our grounds manager, who's sitting behind me, Jeff Barnes, our assistant director, and Dave McKenzie, our deputy director, who many of you know. Those 3 guys have really taken grounds care to heart and all the things that go with it. And I'm just so proud of them. So I wanted to say that. You'll notice that over the years, we've increased our acreage just in the past couple of years with Liberty, Alexander, and Hoover East. We've added 100 acres. That's pretty significant when you really don't increase the staff significantly with it. We have over 50 athletic and practice venues, 3 of them which are synthetic fields, which actually require as much or not more maintenance to take care of. Playground safety, we've had a significant reduction. You'll see in the report over the past 3 years. We track incidents and accidents on the playgrounds, and we take that very seriously. We've fixed a lot of equipment, but we've also reduced the incidents by a pretty good amount. Playground life cycle is part of that. We have refined that over the last 3 years to the point where we really know which pieces of equipment need to be replaced. We do our best to include that in our life cycle plans. One thing you may not be aware of that's pretty well identified in the report is a tree canopy study. And we have one of our grounds personnel who does a lot of this, and we've identified all the trees in the district. That's not an easy task. And the reason we did that was so we can get out ahead of the emerald ash borer and stay on top of tree maintenance. We're doing a lot of tree trimming now and trying to stay ahead of damage that occurs to trees if you don't maintain them. You'll find a chart in there that has every school and has trees by school. So that's something we've taken on the last few years, and Jess Holland is the person that does that. Some of you may recognize that name. He was a pretty well-known athlete at City High in his day. But he loves trees, and he does a good job with them. IPM, that was quite the discussion a few years ago, and I think I can honestly say that I think it's fully integrated into our grounds maintenance program. IPM is in grounds, it's in crafts, it's the custodians. They all take it seriously, they all do it, and we have had a significant reduction in the use of pesticides. Has it reduced labor? No, because I think that's the downside of that is that you do have more labor involved. It's a lot more labor intensive at times. So I think it's a trade-off, but it's obviously we've created a much safer environment for our staff and our students. Fence maintenance. We have miles and miles and miles, and we keep adding miles and miles of fence. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a mile of fence at Liberty High alone. So, but the grounds crew takes care of that. They maintain them. They fix them. People run into them all the time. So that's another area that we've developed over the last few years, as well as taking care of our flagpoles, taking care of our signs, storm sewer management, drainage tile, irrigation fields. All of that is done by the grounds crew. In 2013, we brought grounds crew back in the house. It was outsourced at the time. It had been for many, many years. In those first couple of years, we were continually evaluating if we were doing the right thing. Did we do the right thing by bringing it in, or would the district have been better off if we outsourced it? It was tough to compare because the outsourcing was basically grounds care, some athletic fields, but no snow plowing, no playground maintenance, and all the other things, some of the things I just mentioned. So we've added a lot of value to what we did originally. So back in 2013-14, the cost of the district was $400,000. But when you went back at the time and added in the cost of the value-added services, it really raised it to more like $750,000. That number's, and over time we've increased the amount of work that that crew is doing. I might add that we've had very few turnover lost positions or turnover of staff. Those original guys are still with us. They do a nice job. And those costs have gone up, and you'll see in there that we're right at $1 million in this past year for all the other things that we do. But I think when you look at what they're doing a good job. So with that, I'd answer any questions you might have.
I have one quick one, just because it's kind of a personal story, and it's kind of going to your little chart there on tree coverage. It's obviously all the newest schools have almost no tree coverage. When back in my time at Garner, I know the PTO talked about buying some trees and trying to help it because we wanted some trees near our playground and whatnot. And I know there was some discussion at that point that there was kind of rules to make sure you had sight lines out to all the edges, for safety purposes and that. So I was just wondering what type of system is in place for some of these new schools to get trees put on the campus.
Yeah, we've added some trees through our programs, but I think the community through grants has been one way that it's been done. But I think, and Ben, you can address it if you'd like, you can come up, but I think, we don't like to put in trees that attract bees, for example, or require cleanup. Crabapple trees are messy, so we really don't care to have those type of trees. They need to be the right type of trees. we need a variety of trees. Did he come up, or is he just leaving?
Right behind you.
Here, I'll let him fill in.
So within grounds, we actually monitor the growth of our canopy. And what I mean by that is we actually study the diameter of the trees and project how large a tree is going to be 60 years from now. And we do that for multiple reasons. We want to know that we're still going to be able to provide full sun space like on soccer fields and that. We also do it to see what kind of impact we have on energy on the actual buildings. So there's actually software that projects that stuff. So to get to your answer, we do have rules on where we're trying to plant trees for energy, for line of sight, for security, as well as things like bees and everything of that nature. But how we go about expanding trees, sometimes during construction, the city mandates expansion. Apart from that, we have a 1-to-1 ratio. If we remove a tree, we replace at least one tree to take its place. And then we work a lot with Project Green, and the kindergarten classes actually plant a single tree for every single kindergarten class. And we monitor that balance between our current population of trees versus what we're planting. And what we try to do is try to maintain that in a 3% threshold within a given school. So, for example, if Gardner came to us and said we wanted to plant trees, we would actually look at how much space was available, what the projections were for the trees that were there, and then we try to balance that out. So maybe they planted 5% over a 3 or 5 or 6 year period versus going out and putting in 50 trees all at one time. Yeah, I think that kind of sums it up.
And we work pretty closely with the architects and landscape
We do.
architects and the species of trees we're putting in the new schools. So there are a lot of young trees out there too that probably aren't all accounted for.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I've got thank you. I've got a few questions. And tree mapping's a lot easier now with Google Earth. It's helped dramatically. First off, I want to thank for the organizational chart on 4. That's very helpful, and I think with all our reports, we should have those, and I think that's great. And I agree, IPM has made great strides. I would like to see a goal of zero chem use on our grounds, and I think that's achievable, and we need to get there, because we used to have that with our previous vendor. On page 42, I'd like us to always provide a total. It's a long list of all of our equipment that we have, and it's no small amount of equipment that came out of Pebble and I think that has to be there, and I think a depreciated cost and everything has to be figured in and everything there, and that on 42. 44, can the representation outlined in the RFP be compared to the current cost to provide these same tasks?
I think that's a pretty tough task to accomplish, and we had this discussion a year ago, and then Craig Hansel told us it's okay to talk about some of the value-added things that we've done, but to actually sit down and I suppose you could interpolate, you could take the value-added things we're doing now and go back and add it and inflate the original cost.
And sometimes, and I understand, back when Quality Care did it, it was just grounds, didn't include snow, but we knew the snow cost. And you could add it, we knew what we were spending on snow, you could add that in, and then you could have a comparative.
And if you go back into the report, you'll actually see how many hours we've spent on snow removal the last 4 years. And so, it's.
Right. And that's dependent on the weather.
Yeah.
As well as grounds too. We have drought years where we should be recognizing some
And
savings.
we're done with the snow this year, so.
Right. Well, we started with one, but it wasn't too bad. On 46, and I'll read the highlighted areas I have here. At the request of the ICCSD board, the grounds department reviewed the request of breaking down grounds department expenditures by facilities. The grounds department worked with the business department to determine, this is what we're kind of discussing, that for tasks. Most often, crews are divided and don't complete tasks when operating at a location. We should be tracking where we're working and what we're doing. And that's so that's an efficiency tool, as far as I'm concerned. And that can be as simple as a task sheet for the day that's turned in and compiled, and you can say, we had 3 guys at this school, that time, labor, and materials was applied to that building.
Do you want to
And-
answer that?
Well, I'll just, and then along with that, temporary workers are not given free access to facilities for security reasons and therefore cannot use the time clock system for time tracking. Well, how are they paid?
No, they use the clock down at the facility.
Okay.
At the physical plant. But other craftsmen can enter a building if they're leaving there at the end of the day and clock out, but they can't, but grounds crew has to return back to
Oh,
our facility.
I understand, but we
Maybe
should
that's
be,
not
we
worded
should
right.
also be able to track temporary work going in there and working on our grounds at different buildings and build those in, because it's just, it's too much of a black hole if we don't know what's going on.
Well, I think we probably have a pretty good handle what they're doing just based on their task and what we're getting accomplished. Again, it's weather driven and there are days that they do different tasks, but
Well, then we should be able to get the cost to the building.
we'll look at it.
On 47, where you have the price for prairie, athletic turf, and everything like that, can these costs be multiplied times square footage to get a cost for each location?
You can. It's really meant to be kind of a ballpark figure for us to do some quick calculations when we're comparing different sites. An example of that would be, we compare A level turf versus B or C level turf, and we want to know what the impact is if, Jeff approaches me and says, we need to cut 3% of the budget. I can quickly calculate out what happens if we downgrade B level turf square footage down to C level maintenance, and it's really meant as a tool to kind of give us a quick decision making based on numbers versus intuition and stuff. So yeah, you could calculate that out, and it would be in the ballpark. I mean, that's part of how I do the estimates for the budget numbers.
Okay. And, we started with 6, we're at 9. The last contract with Quality Care was $358,647 for grounds. We're well above that, twice that, plus. And I think it's in a tight budgetary time, we have to consider all costs. And I haven't seen a report on the successful proficiencies or outcomes of students based to grass height. We have to maintain them, make them safe, and that, but we have to recognize that our primary function is being an educational institution and maximizing that for our students. But I think that we need more specificity and detail on this to make sure that we're on top of costs. And I think we should look for every opportunity there to do that. And as I mentioned before, our community wants chem-free, and we should have a goal and a priority to get to that point as quick as possible. And on our turf fields, I know we had some discussions earlier from one school where they were concerned that some staph infections were for poor maintenance and everything that way. How are you seeing our artificial turf maintenance, and are we going to get the full life cycle out of these fields to justify the investment?
Well, I guess time will tell is the real answer, but over the years, I've seen turf fields last anywhere from 7 to 12 years, and I think if we use an average of 10, it's probably safe. It does require grooming. It does require additional rubber pellets occasionally to keep the cushion there that's there. The staph infection you're referring to, we did have several experts look at it, and they all told us that Mother Nature and the sunlight will take care of most of that on its own on a turf field. So I think we didn't actually apply any chemicals, did we, at West Island? No.
Okay, any further questions?
Just one, are there any plans for any more prairie? That's,
Yeah, so each year we actually expand our prairie. Early estimates put us at something like 20 to 25 acres that was non-functional space, meaning it wasn't being used for playground activities, gym classes, or anything of that nature. Each year we try to expand, within our limits of trying to handle that expansion, which really calculates out to 1 or 2 acres is what it's been recently. It's been slowed down by quite a bit just because of the construction that's going on. We are responsible for taking over the grounds immediately after construction, all the grow-in process and everything of that nature. But like with Liberty High, it was a part of the design process early on to have wetland area, prairie area. We're going to add more prairie area up there once construction's completed, so yeah.
right, yeah, I mean, obviously from a cost perspective, but then it's also Iowa, right? So the more
absolutely.
natural.
One thing that's required of us, of the district, is that when we do a project, if there are designated wetland areas, we have to replace it with an equal amount or exceed it, which we're doing at Liberty High. When we buy property, we actually do what we call a wetland delineation report. That 18 acres that's north of Liberty High actually has some identified wetland area in there, so we'll probably have to expand that and develop that a little bit. It's a natural waterway through there. So we're pretty cognizant of that, and I think we do a pretty good job of keeping it up, make them look better, and manage them. They do get disturbed sometimes when you build new buildings, so that's why and you don't have to put it on the same site. You can actually replace it on another piece of property that you have as long as they approve it.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions? Dwayne, thank you. Ben, Jeff, appreciate the report. We'll move on to the comprehensive annual financial report, and that's Leslie.
The Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or CAFR, to shorten that up, was provided in your packet. You have a hard copy in front of you this evening, as well as a presentation that Heidi Hobkirk from RSM is going to present to you. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Heidi.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you for having me this evening. I'm going to go over, you did also get a paper copy of the presentation that we're displaying. Tonight I'll go through some summarized June 30th information, and then the compliance report and the auditor communication, or the results from the audit. So first, looking at your governmental funds, which includes your general fund, along with your special revenue and capital project funds. Overall revenue increased about $7.8 million from the prior year. And those two areas that caused the increase is local taxes. Within there, your increase was caused by property taxes, which was mainly driven by assessed values. And then also your other local sources did increase, and that had to do with several energy rebates that you received through the construction process. For those same funds, we chart out the expenditures by functions. And a couple things to note here. First, in total, it increased about $11.3 million, or 5%. Debt service, all the way to the right in bright yellow, that increased about $5.25 million. These were just normal scheduled payments on those bonds that you have outstanding, so those will fluctuate from year to year depending on the maturity schedule. And then also your instruction and special instruction increased, mainly due to salary and related taxes and benefits to those salaries. This is looking at just the general fund and the fund balance, or the equity portion. Equity is broken down into three components. First is non-spendable. Those are just prepaid assets that you have, so you can't convert them to cash. So that's the green bottom line. The red category, and also listed off to the right, is your restricted. Those are dollars that are actually received in, but you haven't spent yet, and they're restricted by third parties. So you have to use them for very specific purposes, and those purposes are listed to the right. And then the blue is your unassigned, which can be used on any expenditures within the district. There was a decrease overall in the general fund of about $2.7 million to bring your final year-end general fund balance to $21.1 million at June 30th, 2018. Next, we look at the school nutrition fund. This is accounted for a little bit differently than the governmental funds, so we do put that separately. We look at operating revenues versus operating expenses, which are the first two columns. Your operating expenses did go up about $486,000, again, due to salaries in the current year. I would also note that in the last column, that's the change in net position. So it was showing a loss in the current year. There was a correction related to the current year and some prior year related to unearned. I'll go into a little bit more detail later. That was run through the current year. Also, if we remove that prior year adjustment, the change would have been about $136,000 compared to last year's $228,000. The compliance reporting is a tab within the CAFR, and there's two sets of standards that we audit within that compliance. The first one is the governmental auditing standards, and this is where we look at your internal controls and compliance over your financial statements. So we look overall at the checks and balances, segregation of duties, and then also if there's anything that we see through our testing that we notice are errors or adjustments, they're evaluated too under these standards. So in the current year, there were no material weaknesses reported, but there were two significant deficiencies that were reported. The first one was in regards to some credit card transactions that we tested. As part of our annual testing, we do choose certain individuals to look at, and at times we do have a tendency to focus on management because of their abilities within the system and their oversight. And as a result of that, we noticed a couple things that because it involves senior management and management, we're required under the standards to communicate that to the next level, which would be you as the board. So that's what elevates it to a significant deficiency also, not necessarily what we found, but because who was related and our responsibility of communication. So we found that a member of senior management's credit card activity was being reviewed by a subordinate. So our recommendation is always that the person above that individual review those transactions. There was a member of management that had the ability to make purchases on the credit card, and it wasn't reviewed by another member of management. And then there were some airline tickets purchased that had an upgrade to Comfort Plus. And there was also one of 40 transactions that we tested that didn't have supporting documentation. I have talked to management subsequent to the audit, and they've already implemented procedures. So through the discussions, they shared with me that they're having the proper approvals done for both the member of management and the senior member of management. And they're also working on a policy over credit cards and travel that's specific to those areas to help in that also. So we'll test for that in next year's audit, but they've taken the steps already to make those corrective actions.
Yeah, and on that, so that was picked up by a random check?
Yeah, somewhat. We select certain people sometimes to test, so because of that testing,
Okay.
We found this, yeah.
And so if you have the senior review, if it's, and this is hypothetical, if it's a superintendent, who's the reviewer of the superintendent? Is that us?
It would be the board, yes.
Okay.
Yep, because everyone else reports to the superintendent, so you look at kind of that hierarchy.
Okay, so you did a random this year, you do another random. Doesn't when you do a random and you hit and you say, wow, we found something here, doesn't that make you want to just check everything just to make sure?
We did expand, so it wasn't completely random. We do some random travel expenses over the whole district, and then also this year we selected specific individuals from management to test related to their credit cards. So when we did that, we looked at quite a few of their months because we did find these specific things. So we looked at several months looking specifically for these type of activity. So we did, after our initial find, we did increase it, but we were already testing, I think, 3 or 4 months out of the year, so.
So you didn't find any greater?
No.
Okay, so
No.
it was pretty much isolated to?
Yes.
To that?
Yep.
And as far, and I'm sure you read the paper too, what's happening in other districts, are you confident that we're addressing this and that we have this under control? Because in some other districts, it's gotten to the point where the legislators are kind of stepping in.
Yeah, so based on the communication we received from management from the procedures they've put in place, it appears adequate to, they've added the controls, which is the key there, the oversight and a review. So yes, based on that communication, I would say that they've put appropriate procedures into place. And then having the policy too to spell out, because like the airline seats, that if the board approves that you can get up to a certain class, that's not necessarily wrong. It's just right now there's no policy. So when you deflect back to kind of to the state code of public purpose, it's a judgmental thing. And since there's no guidance, that's why we reported it. So having a policy in place over those things also is a good step to take. And I know they're working on that. I don't think it's been fully implemented yet, but you're working on it, correct? Yes.
Yeah, and well, I know I used to travel overseas a lot and had done enough travel that I had an automatic upgrade.
Yep.
I'm sure we may have staff in that same situation, when it's an automatic thing and it's not a monetary level, but this was one that it was a cost.
It appeared that when the ticket was originally purchased, it was purchased as a comfort seat, so normally
Okay.
that.
And also, and I had this discussions with Les, but I think it's important for the public, standards for like limits on food. When we have staff that travels, and if I can use Les as an example, I mean, Les is a big fan of Subway, and if everybody were to go to Subway, we would incur some savings. And that, but do you have any guidelines or anything to help us with that as far as, are there, understandably, if you're in New York for something, it's more expensive even to go to Subway,
Right.
or as opposed to Cincinnati, Ohio. So are there anything there where you can help us with some guidance on that?
I can tell you what we see. So we do sometimes see various governmental entities provide a per diem instead of actual costs, and so they set what they feel is appropriate. There are federal government guidelines out there. I will say they are quite low. So a lot of time, maybe you start with that and then decide what you're comfortable with as a district. The other thing is building in maybe that policy, if you're allowing people to take actual, to define what is reasonable. While we all believe people have good judgment, sometimes, people believe what I believe. Maybe I believe going out and having a steak dinner is reasonable, and someone else believes Subway is. So having those definitions and maybe some clear guidance on what is allowed, or capping what the total would be, so they could get actual up to an amount. Those would be recommendations that we have. I can't tell you a dollar amount or what's appropriate. You have to decide that as a board and as a district. But those are things that we see on ways to limit and provide that guidance to your employees of what's allowed.
Is that kind of cap or per diem going to be included in the travel policy that's being worked on? Yeah, for meals and lodging and stuff like that, transportation, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. The second significant deficiency, I mentioned earlier in the Student Nutrition Fund that there was an error from the prior year. It was related to unearned revenue that wasn't recorded. So we did work with management and corrected that in the current year. It is reflected appropriately in the CAFR this year. But because of that, and it was an error, we evaluate that, and the internal control process didn't catch that error, that transaction, so we report it as a significant deficiency to you. The state compliance reporting are on pages 114 through 116 of the CAFR. These are areas that we are required to by the state auditor's office in Iowa to report on. So they're very specific in criteria that we need to report on. So there are a couple things that appear or are spelled out like a finding. The first one is certified enrollment. I believe I stand up here every year and tell you that the state verifies enrollment and they do find errors. It's not unusual for all districts to have this. So the district investigates it. They did concur with the state's change, and it was a decrease of about 2.66 students. You also had a function within your certified budget that was over in actual expenditures. So actual expenditures were more than the budget this year related to support services. I will tell you from management's response to the finding, that was due to they budgeted AEA flow through in a different line other than support services, and then it's recorded within support services for the actual. So it was just kind of a misclassification between where it was budgeted and where it has to be reported for financial purposes. We also do an audit over your single audit or your federal programs. So this year, the Child Nutrition Cluster was a program that we tested. We look at that in very fine detail. We do compliance findings or compliance testing along with internal control testing around that. You did receive an unmodified or clean opinion over the program itself. And then in addition to that, there were no findings that we found as a result of testing that program. And the last thing I'm going to touch on is the Auditor Communications. I would point out it's the stapled packet that you received, so if you do want to look at anything in more detail after my presentation tonight, you would find it there. First is to let you know you received a clean or unmodified opinion over your financial statements. What that tells you is that they are not materially misstated, and that's the best opinion that you can receive, so I congratulate you for that. In this year's opinion, there is what we call an emphasis of matter. It's going to call out the fact that you implemented a new standard over the post-employment benefits, and that resulted in a restatement. This restatement is due to the implementation of a new standard. You're reporting those post-employment benefits differently this year, so you restate beginning net position. It's not because there was an error, so I always like to point that out. And if you look at your peers, they're all going to have a similar statement and restatement within their financials. Just to let you know, for the post-employment benefits, in the past, it's been looked at on a funding basis. Now they're looking under the standards. They changed it to look at it at accounting, or basically what you're doing is recording the unfunded actuarial calculation of the liability related to those post-employment benefits that you're providing to employees at the time of retirement, but they're earning them now as they provide service to you. You might be thinking, well, what post-employment benefit do we provide? It's kind of a hidden one. Under the standard, when you provide health insurance benefits to your retirees, and even though in your eyes they're paying 100% of those premiums, under the standard, if they're not being charged age-adjusted premiums, there's a benefit there. So the difference between what you're actually charging them and an age-adjusted premium is the benefit that they are receiving. It's called an implicit rate. So most districts and governmental entities within Iowa provide that implicit benefit. In addition to adding the liability, there's also a change in the footnote disclosure related to the post-employment benefit plan, so a lot more there. It's for those of you who have been around for a couple of years and know the pension, and if you were here when I mentioned when you changed the pension reporting for IPERS, the post-employment benefit, it's now following the same criteria and looks very similar to what the pension disclosure has been looking like. As part of your CAFR preparing that, management does use judgment and estimates, and as part of our auditing process, we look at those that are significant, and we do additional testing and sometimes get third parties involved. And our review of all those and their methodology, we had no concerns, and all of them we believe are reasonable how they're stated within the CAFR. There were 2 audit adjustments. The one was related to the nutrition program to correct that error. The other one was within the general fund, but it was what I would call a balance sheet. It related to an asset and a liability, so there was no net position or revenue or expense effect. So just a balance sheet only for the general fund. We also had a couple uncorrected misstatements. There are 2 types this year. The first uncorrected misstatement is us just demonstrating, as we're required to under the standards, if you correct something related to prior years in the current year, it's shown in this chart. And what it's doing is showing you how it ran through the current year, so your expenditures were overstated or understated, and then it corrects itself at the end of this fiscal year. So at the end of June 30th, 2018, related to those prior year corrections, there is no net position impact. It's all been corrected. So one management found themselves and actually brought to us, but because we're aware, we have to report it, and that was related to a capital asset. And then the other one was related to the unearned revenue in the nutrition program. In addition to that, when we tested accounts payable, we did find a small error that then we had to project over the population because we sample. So there was about a $13,000 error within accounts payable. Management actually over-accrued based on an invoice that was split between the 2 fiscal years, and that will correct itself in fiscal year 2019. Lastly, we just like to comment that we had no disagreements with management. We didn't discuss any significant issues, nor did we have any difficulties in performing the audit in the current year. So before I turn it over for any questions, I do want to thank Leslie and Craig and their department and all the others throughout the district that provide us information and answer our questions. We appreciate all their work and the information that they provide us, and we couldn't complete the audit without their help, so we do want to thank them.
Fantastic.
And with that, I would turn it over. Any questions that you have for me?
Thank you, Heidi. Anything for follow-up here?
With regards to third-party contracts, how much do you go into depth in those when you're doing your audit review?
Well, we do some test to controls, so we look at the control process over bidding and quotes. So if it would be part of that process, we would look at that part of it. But digging into contracts themselves, unless it was a transaction that we selected for testing or we were made aware of a concern, or if there was a very material one within our thresholds, we would subject it to testing. But most of it's going to be if it's selected through our sampling.
Okay, I guess I don't follow completely when you're saying material.
We establish a materiality. So when we perform an audit, we establish materiality based on your financial information and our firm's calculation, and that provides us certain thresholds, whether we test information, we can pass on it, things like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Thank you, Heidi, for that thorough report. Appreciate it. Leslie, anything else to add from
I'd like to
Jennifer?
thank Heidi and her team from RSM for their cooperation this year in the audit and walking us through a couple of these things. We will be submitting yet this month to the GFOA and ASBO International for the Certificate of Excellence. It will be our attempt for the 14th straight year to receive those certifications. So that's on my radar over the next week.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, we've got the Pearl discussion. Who's going to lead that tonight?
I am. So this was a request from the board for more information about Pearl. The first thing I'd draw your attention to in the handouts is the committee report from November 24th of 2014. And I draw that to your attention because this would not be the first time that the board has considered the opportunity that a physical education and recreation levy might pose to the district. So at that point in time, the board charged us with putting a committee together to go out and investigate what Pearl was, how much money it would generate for the district, what it could be used for. If you look at that report, you see a fairly large number of people from within the district that took a look at it and considered what the opportunities would be for us as a district. I'd like to point out that there are significant restrictions to what those dollars can be used for, not unlike other levies in the district, physical plant and equipment levy, instructional service levy. This one, as noted in the documents, is sometimes referred to as the playground levy, and that's simply because a large portion of the districts that are using it use it to do significant playground upgrades. But it has wider applications. For that, I would draw your attention to the Pearl funding opinion letter that was provided to us by Attorney Holland's office. That's a relatively lengthy document, 10 pages long, responding to a specific set of questions about how much latitude we might have in Pearl. I think this is really important for us to consider because I think one of the things that we can look at is both the long-term success of things like our playgrounds, but also expanding some other programs that fall into that community service realm. And then I would also then draw your attention to I believe it's in the Pearl General Information. Yes, it is. Pearl General Information document about a third of the way down, fourth bullet on that page, indicates that for our district with our current taxable value, if the Pearl was passed and implemented, it would yield just over $800,000 annually to the district. One could look at that and argue that's not a lot of money. On the other hand, you could start converting it into things like rubberizing playground surfaces, putting preschool programs into play, concerning adult education, things like that. That's a pretty significant revenue source for us, and in particular, in light of some of the challenges we're facing at the state level, really creates some opportunities for us where we might otherwise look at constraining programs. And I think about pre-K as one of those examples. But this is a levy that's passed by our community. It would be required to be placed on a ballot. It would require to get 50% plus one of the eligible voters who participate in the election in order to implement that. Following implementation, then we have the opportunity to enact the levy, and then once those funds are received, again, we have those restricted opportunities to expend those in the budget. So without going into too much more detail, are there questions that I can answer for you about this?
On the first page, and that's information from 2014.
Yes.
On the back side of it, you have, currently there are 20 out of 348 school districts. What's the current number on that?
Yes, and actually, if you look at the fourth attachment, which is schools with Pearl right now, I'd have to do a quick count for you, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 23, I believe. Schools have that. You can see the subtotal that they generate in that as part of their levy. You can see the 1350 enacted levy over there on the third from the right. So they've enacted the full amount there, and you can see the amount of money that they generate as a result of that.
So there's 23 out of 348.
Yes.
I just want to comment that I met with Dr. Hansel this week, I guess it'd be last week now, regarding some details of Pearl and the legal opinion. And one thing that he really emphasized when I met with him was the need for the funding to be utilized by the community, not just the school district. And there needs to be ideally a community partnership
Yes.
in the use of these funds. And that got me thinking and asking some questions of various people in the community. And actually, I think this is really good timing. As people may be aware, the Board of Supervisors is right now spending quite a bit of time, and they're having some action meetings looking at poverty in Johnson County. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be fabulous if the school district could start having some community, or have some meetings with them to talk about this funding. I understand that there was a meeting just today where the question of funding for childcare came up, and we did not have a school board member at that meeting, and didn't get a chance to bring this up, but I brought it up later to a couple people that were at that meeting. And they're very excited about the option here. And I think that for this to go on the ballot and have the community be part of what we're erecting and using the money for, and I know this can't be used for facilities, but the community could help us with facilities, and then we could use this money to help operate. So I'm really, really excited about getting together with other leaders in our community, municipalities, and the Board of Supervisors, and whoever else we need at the table to start talking about how we could work together to have facilities available, potentially funded by a source other than the school district. That it's something that we would have to explore, and then having these operating funds is just incredible, in my opinion.
Yeah, big focus of the United Way a couple of years ago was looking at, they call it both birth to 3 and birth to 6, which is not only, birth to 3 obviously is the very early childhood, but then they looked at it as birth to 6, which is the handoff, if you will, as parents entrust their kids to the public schools for their education process, and how to look at that as a continuum and not as an end and a beginning, so to speak. And we met quite a few times on that, and it was all about partnerships. It was about how do we reach out to other public and other private providers of childcare, in that, in particular in that birth to 3 range, which, as I learned through that task force, is incredibly hard to find and very expensive. And one of the reasons the United Way was so interested in that is it has a significant impact on the workforce in our community because of people's inability to work. And I think that we're a logical partner for that. Amy and Diane and our team already do a lot of work with pre-K, both with the students that come to us, but also with the private providers in town, and that's part of that community bridge that you were talking about. So I do think that there are a lot of opportunities for us here. I would tell you that when we've talked about that internally as a team, we could spend each of these dollars about 6 ways over. You heard a little bit, I know Susie's not here right now, but her work with the CDAC committee and some of the ideas that they have. I think this is another source of revenue for us, which, separate from the general fund, allows us to meet needs of students and our families, and to do so without a direct impact on the general fund. And as we did back in 2014, as an administrative team, we would recommend going out to the community, seeking their input, hopefully seeking their approval, and upon obtaining that, considering putting it on the ballot.
So what, the board just didn't vote for it in 2014? I mean,
No,
okay.
you're right. At that point in time, one of the real concerns was knowing that through the facility master planning process, we were going to have to go out and ask for a general obligation bond. There was a real concern about getting in front of that, trying to do it simultaneously, knowing that that was already a big ask, and not wanting to confuse the ballot issue, which I fully understand. It made sense at the time, but again, it's a huge opportunity for us.
Well, I mean, I'll just say this, that the work that the committee did back then is enough for me. Like, I don't think we need another committee. Personally, I mean, there's a lot of information here. The letter from Joe is very detailed on the kinds of things we could use it for. It's the information is not too old. So I personally would be very supportive of this.
And again, knowing that there are lots of targets for these dollars, I'd share that Dwayne and I have had an extensive conversation about it. He would love the opportunity to accelerate the improvement of our playground surfaces. So I will tell you again that our team was happy to spend each of those dollars multiple times over with basic needs that are inside the district. But I think the other thing that's important to recognize on this particular levy is when voted in, it remains in place until there is a explicit effort to remove it. So it does provide us in perpetuity an opportunity, whether it's through community partnerships, to make a commitment long-term, and to be able to, as a partner, say we're here for the long haul. I think that makes a difference. As Dwayne and I talked about, if a portion of it goes to playgrounds, we know that over time, that allows us to continue to do that work. We know that those things don't last forever. Now there's an opportunity as we go through the refresh cycle to know that there may be funds available for that. So it does provide a lot of opportunities for us.
And I love the committee report that was giving. My only concern in getting to some information that Lori shared, I think if we're serious about pursuing that, we need to have that community partnership and that discussion. So it may still be some type of committee work that has to happen in order before we as a board say, yes, this is something, because we do want to ensure that those funds are spent in a way that benefit those in a community who may have an idea on maybe, I don't know if this is an exhaustive list of the recommendations that was there, but from my standpoint, they look great, but who knows, there may be some additional things from United Way, Board of Supervisors, City Council.
I think Hills will have some input there when we meet with them after the first of the year. I think this can impact some of that conversation.
So, I mean, I agree. If this is a direction we want to go, I think the board needs to spend some time, maybe in a work session, kind of plotting out our strategy and approach to it. Who are the community groups we want to outreach to? I mean, because this does have to pass a vote, we need to make sure that we've got the support in the community to actually get it passed. We can mentally spend it every which way we want, but we don't have it yet. So maybe we get through the Hills meeting in January, schedule a work session at some point, after that, to see how we can get ourselves organized to actually put this into action.
And to the point that several of you made, that Lori started out with, establishing some good municipal partners, I think, helps us come together as a community. And again, it's a small ask, but it's still an ask, right? That 13.5 cents is still an ask of our community, and I think that if we can demonstrate that the cities are on board with it, because again, if there's a playground element, that the county's on board with it as we look at addressing childcare and wraparound services, as we reach out to private childcare providers to make sure that they are on board with it and recognize this isn't a threat to them. I think if we can do all of those things and build that goodwill, that gives us a much higher likelihood that we get community support for it.
So I'm seeing heads nod around a work session topic on Pearl and how to put a strategy in place for making that happen, and we can schedule that for after the new year.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Anything else on Pearl? That's a great conversation, thank you. So moving into our discussion items, first up, we've got the F&P bond project update, and I'm assuming, is that Dwayne? Are you gonna cover that tonight? Leslie. Oh, Leslie, thank you, sorry.
Actually, this was requested by a board member, I don't remember who it was, some time ago when the board actually passed to provide these updates. This was generated as of September 30th, so it has passed by a couple months, but it was one of those reports that I think got moved back as you took your significant efforts on the attendance area work. So we will be updating this in future months, hopefully on a quarterly basis. But it just gives you an idea of what you've approved in terms of bond issuances, and you coming up here, you'll finish up the second bond issuance, which is listed here as $65.3 million, which is slightly above that. How the money was still being invested that Dwayne and his team hadn't spent yet. And then finally, the projects that were included in the $191 million bond referendum and the budget for all of those and the expenditures to date. And there was just a quick snapshot of where those projects were at that point in time. But obviously, the full detail of those projects and where they're at would be found in Appendix 9 that you see at your regular board meetings, and approve those steps as a project moves through those various elements. So with that, it's just, unless you'd like to see something different on this report, we're certainly open for suggestions, since it is our initial attempt to provide this feedback to you.
I am wondering about the elementary schools that, in which the work needs to be completed before they can open or reopen, in the case of Mann and Lincoln, and in the case of Grant and North Liberty. There was discussion, I think 2 weeks ago, about Grant being behind schedule. Are those projects going to be ready for the first day of school?
You want to answer that?
You, sure.
Sorry.
I would say, of course.
Yeah, it's no secret. Grant is they're behind. The weather has really delayed them a little bit in getting getting the structure enclosed. We took a lot of serious photos out there today, and they'll be on the Grant website here tomorrow. I'm sure you'll be able to see them. But progress has picked up. They're starting to really make some hay, so to speak. You know, I mean, and if the weather can hold for a couple of weeks like we had today, it'll certainly help. I'm not so concerned about the pavement and the concrete and all that can be done in the spring and the summer. We can get caught up. What I'm concerned about is getting the building closed in so we can keep working all winter. If you don't close it in, you can't get anything done inside. But if you look at the photographs, if you log on to the Grant website in the next day or two, you'll see there's ductwork going in, there's plumbing going in, there's all kinds of things going inside that building. The concrete floors have been poured. So am I concerned? Yeah. Am I ready to say that they're going to fail? No. I really think that they have plenty of opportunity to get caught up here over the winter, and it'll be tight. I think I watched the video from the last meeting, so I saw the questions. And what accommodations have been made? Well, their contract says July 1st. So I've had a conversation with them, and I said, listen, we know the weather is outside of your control. It's outside of our control. It happens. It happens on big projects at the university, not just us. But we can live with a contract extension, and we'll work out the details to August 1st. But on August 1st, we're moving in. You know, I've got furniture. I've got all kinds of things we got to put in that building to get ready for school, whether the 22nd or whatever day that is. So they understand that. There may be some punch list things that get taken care of in August, but we had a really good meeting. back in November, and I said that that's what we'd be willing to do. We'll work with you on shelters and putting some heat in there. So I think it's a good solution. I don't think this has all been all on the contractor. I think a lot of it's weather related. So the other projects, if you drive by Man, they started putting in windows today, and if you haven't seen those windows, they're awesome. I mean, it just wakes that building right up. So it's worth driving by Man in the next few days. They're moving right along. Lincoln as well. Been inside looking at that. That gymnasium is up. They're working on the library and cafeteria now and getting that closed in. So moving right along, I think we'll be okay there as well.
And maybe just one note, and JP and Brady may remember this. The standard operating procedure used to be an August 1st occupancy date. That caused us a lot of stress internally in the district. And so we dialed that back to July 1st as our preferred occupancy date because it gave us time to get in before staff wanted to get in and get their spaces tuned up. So it gave us a lot more flexibility. So August 1st is clearly not ideal from our standpoint with our current set of expectations. Can we make it work? Yes, we've done so multiple times in the past. So Dwayne and I met, we had a long conversation about it. We can live with August 1st. We can't live with anything later than August 1st, but we can live with August 1st. Our hope is that things will proceed apace and that the weather will cooperate and that maybe they can get back on track and actually get us in before August 1st. We know it'll be after July 1, but hopefully before August 1.
And I would add that Steve and I had this conversation, we've had it many times, but a year or so ago when we were doing Hoover East, they got kind of a late start and they had a bad winter as well, and it was in May. And Steve looked at it and said, "There's no way." And I said, "No, there's a way." And we did it, but it was tight as well. And I really think May is when I can tell you, without a doubt, it will be done or it won't be done.
And you were saying we're working with the contractor. Does that mean there'll be added cost to this one?
No, there's no added cost to give them the extra 30 days. The only additional cost that we might incur is is to participate in the additional cost for propane, to keep the place heated in the wintertime, They're going to have to build more shelters. We don't need to lay the brick over the winter. The brick can be done in the spring. So we're working with them on that. So I think the cost to the district is pretty nominal at this point.
And in some of the questions I sent to you, have you been able to refine when they started on the project?
I haven't had time to go back and check the logs. I know they started in May, and they were actually out there moving dirt by the time we had our groundbreaking ceremony on the 22nd of May. The contract was awarded in April, so sometime between, it's probably the first week or two of May is when they started.
And I'm sure you've logged in the date that they expressed concerns that they might have challenges, that they asked the request for the extension?
I can go back and review minutes. We keep minutes of those meetings. We meet every 2 weeks on the job site. We have those. And we talk about the schedule at every job site meeting on every project, every 2 weeks. So some of it's general, some of it might be more specific, but we've had conversations now for the last couple of months. But I had the contractor in my office, in my office on the 5th of November, as I said in that email, and we had a real conversation.
And, I read in the newspaper about Roosevelt. When were these decisions made, and when are we supposed to be getting informed on the long-term utilization of that school?
I think that's moving off the agenda item around the F&P bond update. Is it the track closure? Is that part of this discussion?
No, I was just talking about the facility needs of a building when we're discussing the facilities master plan.
Well, we've had, when the facility master plan's been revised, which has been revised a couple of times since I've been here, the work at track has been set aside. And that's a decision that was approved by the board, frankly.
Yeah, so I think this conversation goes beyond the stated agenda for tonight. I think we need to put that on another agenda. If that's
And I
the
can share that
purpose.
we've got the Theodore Roosevelt Ed Centers on the January 22nd work session.
Okay, good. Any other comments or questions?
Couple of questions real quick. Update on Twain, do you still anticipate that being done after winter break?
It should be done in January. Yeah. Again, they had a little weather, a little water in there. We had some water get into the building, actually. We had to go out there and clean up a couple times over the weekends. But the roofing's on. The walls are built. The drywall's going up, so it's in pretty good shape. I look for it sometime in January being available for us to move into.
And the 2 junior highs still moving along?
Excuse me?
The 2 junior highs still?
Oh, North Central's moving gangbusters. I mean, that.
I drove by that yesterday, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, there's.
Well, you know, a lot of that gymnasium is precast panels that come on a truck, and just getting the trucks in there was an accomplishment, getting the materials back to the site, but it's going up fast. I'm really pleased with the contractor. They've really hustled out there. You know, the 2 classroom additions are going right along. The cafeteria library addition, there's one on the back of the building that you may not even see. And then the gymnasium and fitness centers are moving extremely well. I'm very pleased. Southeast, same way. There's that Castle program classrooms that are being added on the east side. Those are going up. There's an addition you can't see in the courtyard unless you've been to Southeast. Foundations are in, and that's going up. That's a more complicated project, actually, than North Central. North Central's adding 4 additions, okay? Southeast is a total renovation on the inside and the additions and the phasing, and that's a 2-year project, so, but I would say that it's on track.
Is there a service road that's on the east side of Southeast?
That's a new fire lane that was required by the city. There was never a continuous loop around that building, and so they asked us to put that fire lane in.
So will that go out to the street?
I don't believe it does. I believe it stops and there's what we call a hammerhead, where the trucks can turn in and turn at the end of that. There's a really steep hill there.
Yeah.
Up to the road, and I don't think that would be very practical.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all, Leslie and Dwayne, for that report. Moving on to the ag education update. I think, Matt, you're giving us an update there.
Yeah, thanks. I think the 2 main points to hit with the update are that we have a posting up for looking for an ag ed teacher. So we have that posting up and starting to take in applicants for that position. And then the other piece is we've started communication with registration course sign up for students in January. So we'll be engaging the principals in that conversation here through the next 2 months until the students are able to sign up for those following winter break through January there. And really that's kind of where we're at currently with how that looks. We plan to offer an intro section at all 3 high schools. I think we've kind of addressed that here prior to that, but the probably most exciting or the biggest thing would be that the posting for the educators up.
One other thing I'll just add is that there was a paper related every board members a couple meetings ago on a program that Hills Bank offers for deferring the cost of FFA jackets, and the date on that was off. I spoke with Brent Bonner, and that is a program that'll be available at our students when they sign up.
Okay, any other questions for Matt? For that, we'll move to policy and governance. Ruthina.
Sure. In the board packet, there are 3 documents for the board's review. We discussed those. It's not needed for an action item, but up for discussion. It's the ad hoc committee description, advisory committee makeup, as well as the inclement weather guidelines. One thing I wanted to point out for our advisory committee, during our discussion at P&G, we recognize that some of our committees aren't necessarily following the format for membership. So it's not something that the district intends to go in and automatically just from day one implement those membership guidelines, but it'll be an implementation that will evolve along with membership reviews, if that makes any sense. I see some quizzical looks coming from, okay, just wanted to make sure. So I don't know if anybody has any questions or concerns regarding those guidelines, but we wanted to bring them back to the board table for transparency reasons, even though it's not something that we needed to vote on to enact. There was one question about some language that Superintendent Murley did investigate for us. So if you just want to put that on record.
Sure. So if you look at the membership, we talk about to the extent possible in several cases, And in one of those, we talk about ensuring that we have a broad set of membership, members that meet our district expectations. On the top of the second page, to the extent possible, advisory committee membership shall have balanced representation with regard to race, color, national origin, sex, disability, religion, creed, age, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, and socioeconomic status. That mirrors our non-discrim language that we use throughout the district, so we wanted to put parallelism in here. And there were just some questions about whether or not sex, gender identity, actually, I guess there was some just definitional questions about sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And so we went out, we reached out through folks here in the admin team and through some external resources to make sure that they were indeed separate categories. We've got good operational definitions for those, shared those with the committee to reinforce that with them, and we would recommend that all three of those remain in the policy.
I have a personal nit probably on the advisory committee document where it says they don't require formal minutes to be kept. Again, it's just a personal preference. I feel like for any kind of committee where you've got to go through selection of who's going to participate, and you've got a very specific topic that the committee is working on, they're meeting. I get that they don't have to be public meetings, but I just feel like due diligence, proper committee work requires that minutes be kept. So I'm just stating my opinion on that.
And one of the things that I shared with the committee is to the extent possible, we tried to mirror state statute or board policy language in there, and so a lot of this is literally cut and paste out of there. We did already start to augment some of that language because there are some expectations that we have that we recognize are maybe a little bit stronger than what they recommend. That certainly would be one of those. You'll note that we have a liaison required for all those committees. We did that because we also think that's not a requirement. We think that's a best practice in terms of logistics and things like that. I certainly think that someone fulfilling that role could definitely assist with record keeping as part of that process.
I think we need some record keeping. That's my opinion.
I know that right now that is our standard operating procedure, regardless of whether it's required or not, that we keep minutes of those meetings.
Any other comments or questions for Ruthina on the materials in the board packet? Hearing none, thank you so much for the work of the P&G committee. Moving to action items, first up is voluntary transfer policy. Is there any further comment or question on this? We've been through this a few times.
I just note really quickly for you that the change here is to make sure that we've included the Horn Elementary, Weber Elementary School attendance area issue, so that's the last bullet on the first page.
Yep.
And I know that it rolled over onto the second page, but I do want to draw your attention to the sub-bullet at the top of the second page, which does provide that guaranteed transfer for siblings. I know there were questions about the number of students that would qualify for that. It's approximately 50 kids. We don't know for certain the number of younger children. I will thank the principal at Weber for reaching out to as many families as she could. And of those that she spoke with, approximately half had a younger sibling. For many of the kids, that was the youngest child. So whether they were K1, 2, 3, or 4 at this point in time, it was the youngest child in the family. So she said anecdotally, you're looking at about half of them having a younger sibling. So from that standpoint, obviously that number could get substantially smaller in subsequent years.
Okay. Any conversation? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the voluntary school transfer policy.
So moved.
Second.
Any further conversation?
Just have a quick question. The last page, or the Appendix A, I'm sorry, it's not the last page, but that has the numbers in there for 1819. Those are our numbers?
Those are
now?
our new numbers,
So
yes.
that's
I'm
what we've
sorry,
got,
thank you.
and
Yes, we
can-
had those as draft numbers last time, so those are, I'm going to go back and review them because we had Adam take another look at the demographics, so let me go back and double check those because, and thank you to Adam, by the way, the poor man's been living Guide K-12 internally, externally for about the last month. Let me go back and make sure that that we can double check these, but as of the last iteration when we put the draft together, those are this year's numbers, so those would be the numbers that we would project forward for next year. So to Lori's point, one of the things you note is that we've got a new midpoint in there. You can see it shifted up a little bit, and you can see that there's been some changes based on the new attendance areas in terms of who falls on which side of the line. So we will get those double checked before we publish this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Next up, is there a motion to approve this resolution authorizing issuance of bonds, et cetera?
I move that we approve the resolutions and certificates for the issuance of $66,645,000 general obligation school bonds, Series 2019.
Second.
Any comments or questions? Hearing none, Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Next up is a resolution to approve an application for modified supplemental amount for ELL instruction. Is there a motion to approve that?
Director, I might just point out that you approved a very similar resolution at the last meeting, but when I forwarded the minutes, the Department of Ed indicated that they had, there was one student adjustment in the final count, and it increased our spending authority by, I think it's $1,400 if I, off the top of my head, so we took it. It's a small dent on the 5 million, but we took it.
So I move that we approve the application for modified supplemental amount for ELL instruction beyond 5 years for the 2018-19 school year in the amount of $381,000, $381,531.
Second.
Any further conversation? Hearing none, Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you very much. Moving into the final portion of our meeting tonight, Director Liaison Report. Anything directors would like to comment on beyond what's in the commentary here?
I'm just going to give a real quick summary of the preschool center task force meetings. We've met 3 times now and we've had some really good discussions. I think this is really exciting, the discussions that we're having and things, the possibilities for our district. Just to give you some ideas of what's going on, the group surveyed kindergarten parents at the fall conferences to get information about preschool attendance, why or why not they didn't attend. That was some interesting data. Jay Beaver went to Des Moines to visit their preschool center. Both Des Moines and Davenport have preschool centers in their district, and so Jake brought back some really great information there. We've talked about funding. Let's see. We've talked about we've talked about the obstacles to preschool participation, and really our first meeting came to the understanding that to address these obstacles, we needed to further this discussion of centers. So I believe that Diane is planning potentially on January 22nd, maybe, to provide the board with a more extensive report. Our work will not be done by then, but we can, in light of the Pearl discussion, I think it would be helpful for the board to have a little more detailed information as far as the committee's recommendations.
Anything else people would like to note or highlight? Thank you, Lori. Moving on to the legislative update item, we've got our legislative priorities brochure that's been published that incorporates the edits, I think, that may have come to you. Plus, we've got our set of meetings scheduled.
Yes, and we have our first meeting this Friday. So just a reminder, we invite everyone from Johnson County. We invite boards, we invite administrators, we invite teachers, we invite all of our representatives that are from Johnson County. We've gotten several affirmatives from legislators. This one's a little different than the ones that happen in session. It's an opportunity to get a little preview about what they think might happen there. Maybe we'll get an update on SAVE, maybe an update on supplemental state aid in terms of what they're hearing. I know Senator Bolcom will not be there because some of the subcommittees actually already start meeting, and they have one scheduled on Friday, and he doesn't think he's going to be back in time. And gives us an opportunity to share the good news from the first half of the year with our area legislators. They appreciate that because that goes a long way when they're in the Capitol and down on the floor and trying to help others understand what our needs are. So if you're available, please join us.
Thank you. Anything else from the board on that topic? Thank you, Steve. Hearing none, agenda setting. We are now moving into the new year, 2019. First up will be an exempt session around negotiations on January 8th, followed by a board meeting where we'll have presentations on quarterly special education update, an annual enrollment class size demographics report, annual facilities master plan report, a discussion item on the certified budget review and assumptions, an action item for the request for modified supplemental state aid for dropout prevention. That's what's on deck for the 8th. I'm sorry, for the 9th. No, 8th, sorry. And is there anything else folks would like to request?
Is it possible for us to have a discussion regarding the issue that was brought up by Lucas's PTO for discretionary busing for those children living in the mobile homes, just so it can be transparent, thoughts are out there?
Yeah.
We could, one of the things we could give you the routes that we currently serve, where those kids are now and where they're going to go to school. Yes. If you have something to say about setting the agenda item.
Yeah, we should maybe save it for the
Scrooge.
8th.
Sorry. That was kind of Scroogey. Sorry about that.
We'll save it for the 8th. That's a great suggestion. Thanks, Ruthina.
Yeah, I'd like to put on a report from Matt on some astronauts visiting our district, something he's been working on.
Astronauts?
Astronauts.
Right on.
Not in a spaceship.
They were going to fly up in their own plane, I was told, but
Is that something for the 8th too, or is that going to be, okay. Okay. Kim, did you get that? It's the astronaut item. Anything else?
First.
Anything else for that agenda? Then just to note, we have our meeting with the City of Hills on January 10th.
I'm going to connect with, just thought I'd let you know, I'm going to connect with the mayor next week. He and I set up a meeting next week, just so that I asked him if I could just gather any additional information ahead of time, so that if there are things that we need to bring with us, that we're prepared, so that we have whatever information might help drive that
That's
discussion
great.
forward. So I'm meeting with him next week on Wednesday.
Thank you. And then there's one thing that I've been thinking about, once we get into the new year, kind of get rested up from what has been such an incredibly busy fall. I think we'll want to spend at least an hour or two in a board retreat, just kind of assessing where we are and the goals that we set for ourselves this year, maybe needing to take a refresh. Do we need to update anything? And so I'd like to, after the new year, get a poll out to see if we can see what schedules are like and that kind of thing, just to get it on our calendars and we make sure we carve out the time for it. And then just also to note that we will need to have some time set aside to work on the formative assessment for the superintendent, so we want to get that scheduled as well, make sure that we adhere to the schedule that we put together for that. So just after the new year, doodle polls will come out looking for some availability for those two topics.
Did confirm earlier, we do have an education committee meeting next
Oh,
week.
good question.
We do, yeah.
Yes.
At Borlaug.
At
At
Borlaug.
Borlaug Elementary School.
Yep.
Please.
We will be there, 4:30.
4:30 at
next
Borlaug,
Tuesday.
next Tuesday.
Thank you. Good catch, Sean. Anything else under agenda setting? Hearing none, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, and happy holidays, everyone. We'll see you, next Tuesday.
Topics and then.
Day, yes.
Great. And just the more, spread it around.
Yeah,
So